Chapter 799. Under the immense pressure, Xiao Xian felt like he was in a predicament of ice and fire. On the outside, there were scorching heat waves and flames. On the inside, it was as if his blood had been frozen. No matter what he wanted to do now, the first thing he had to do was to circulate the power that seemed to have been frozen in his body. This was a different world from the physical world. It was a world of spirit and consciousness. Spirit, consciousness, that bright spot. That bright white spot in his sea of consciousness was the core that allowed Xiao Xian to stand here. Xiao Xian controlled the seemingly frozen white power that was different from Yanjiao's fire seed and slowly broke the ice. 1 round, 2 rounds, when the white power began to recover, Xiao Xian could clearly feel that his body, which was originally as cold as ice, began to warm up. However, this situation did not last for long. The power that had just started to become active seemed sluggish again. It was as if melted water had started to freeze again under low temperatures. Again. There was no time to breathe. He had to follow closely. If he wanted to break the ice, he had to break it all the way. Otherwise, if he stopped for even a moment, he would end up frozen again. Xiao Xian controlled the white power and slowly circulated it around the bright white spot that was surrounded by the flames. Some of the frozen white power began to circulate again. 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds. It was as if the surrounding ice was melting again. As the white power circulated again, Xiao Xian could feel that the cold in his body was beginning to weaken. The frozen power was gradually recovering. Faster. Faster. Fireballs of various sizes came crashing down from all directions like a group of meteorites. They directly smashed into Xiao Xian's body and exploded into brilliant flames. Pain. He could no longer feel it. He was numb. Xiao Xian gritted his teeth and endured the huge impact. If this was normal ground, his legs would have sunk into the ground already. However, the flames beneath his feet were responsible for sealing him so he could not sink any further. If this continued, Xiao Xian would be crushed to the ground. Xiao Xian did not have much time to slowly thaw. His body was close to the limit of what it could withstand. If he could not mobilize his power in a short period of time to block the impact of the external force, Xiao Xian would only end up dead. He had to seize the time to control the thawing power in his body, guiding the heat to circulate. Meanwhile, on the Yi family's side, Yi Tuan was in no mood to check on Xiao Xian's situation. He had even forgotten that there was a tribesman here. Perhaps in his heart, he already thought that Xiao Xian had been reduced to cannon fodder. There was only one thought in Yi Tuan's mind. He was trying to find a crack. This was Yi Tuan's plan too. He took out his ancestor's bone oracle. His purpose was not only to block the wall of fire, but also to borrow the strength of the wall of fire and the power created by the bone oracle to break the barrier that was restricting them, even if it was just a thin crack. If Yi Xiang could create a crack in this cage-like boundary, they would be able to escape through it. It did not need to be big, as long as there was a small crack, the boundary would not be completely sealed and they would be able to escape. A crack. Where was the crack? Yi Tuan tried his best to find a crack, afraid that he would miss it. But to his disappointment, there was none. The boundary was still intact, without a single scratch. How was this possible? They had taken out the bone oracle left behind by their ancestors. It could be said that this was the strongest bone oracle they had at the moment, but there was not a single crack in it. What did this mean? This meant that Yi Xiang's power had far exceeded their expectations. The giant tortoise blocking the wall of fire could only hold on for a while. Yi Tuan had no idea how long it could last. Reality hit him again and again, causing the usually calm Yi Tuan to panic. If even the oracle bone objects left behind by their ancestors were unable to give them a chance to escape, then what should they do to avoid being completely annihilated? Yi Tuan racked his brains for a solution. The Yi family was quick-witted and could think of many things in an instant. Even so, Yi Tuan could not come up with a satisfactory solution. It was not just Yi Tuan. The two elders beside Yi Tuan did not rest either. Their brains were probably the most active they had ever been in their lives. What should they do? Just as they were racking their brains, a strange energy wave appeared from another direction. Yi Tuan couldn't help glancing over. His heart raced at the sight of the figure. A powerful aura suddenly appeared, pressing down on the surroundings. Xiao Xian controlled all the power in his body, circulating it according to a specific rule, sparing no expense. The thawed power gathered together, surging out like a tidal wave. Amidst the roars of wind and fire caused by the confrontation between the two heroes, in the world of orange-red flames, a crimson flame that was clearly of a different color suddenly rushed up. It was as if a bolt of lightning had suddenly split open, forcibly squeezing out a gap in this world. A huge figure formed in the middle of the crimson flame, like a battle-axe in a sea of fire. Its rising aura turned into a whirlwind, shattering all obstacles around it. Amidst the twisting, orange-red and crimson waves of fire, the gigantic figure that appeared once again expanded. Around the gigantic figure, the crimson waves of fire that emerged savagely attacked the surroundings, as if they were a ferocious beast that was crazily expanding its territory. Amidst the crisscrossing flames, amidst the spiritual awareness of the Yi family, the huge figure was like an alien, a demon that crawled out of hell. Yi Xian was not the only one to notice. He had been looking in Xiao Xian's direction the entire time, not giving Yi Tuan any extra attention. He did not show any signs of surprise, as if he had expected this. Bone-reading beast? Why does he have a bone-reading beast? Someone in the totem array exclaimed. Doesn't he have the ability to read grass? Where did he get it from? That's... Yi Zong exclaimed. That appeared when Yanjiao left. However, this one was even bigger than the flame giant he had seen before. It was as big as the giant tortoise. Back then, Yi Zong and the Royal City Army had chased after Yanjiao's migration team. They had been stopped by the flame giant and had not been able to catch up in time. In the end, Yanjiao's team had retreated from the mainland. That's the flame giant you mentioned before. Yi Tuan was confused. Wasn't the flame giant Yi Zong had seen corporeal? Why would it appear here? Corporeal? The power of bone-reading beast could be corporeal, but it was different from the one in the spiritual world. It was controlled differently and required more power. To the Yi family, a materialized bone-reading beast was too wasteful. All they needed to do was attack a person's consciousness, there was no need to materialize it. Some in the Yi family recalled the flame giant Yi Zong had mentioned when he returned with the Royal City Army. Back then, some had suspected that it was similar to a corporeal bone-reading beast. However, no one believed that a crude tribesman could have such power, much less the Yi family's control method. So, that's really a giant. How did the tribesman do it? When he first appeared, his figure was blurry. Where did he get the power to control such a huge giant? Also, what kind of person did the Yanjiao tribe use to make such a terrifying thing? Did such a giant really exist? No, he's not using bone reading. That's different from bone reading. Yi Tuan stared, many thoughts running through his mind. After calming down, Yi Tuan could tell if it was bone reading. Bone reading, regardless of whether it was a human or a beast, would have its own unique energy waves. However, they did not feel any aura or energy waves from Xiao Xian at all. If it was not bone reading, then what was it? Even the bone oracle in their hands, although it was left behind by their ancestors, their heirs had been using the best bone oracle to raise it. Only then could this bone oracle be used to its fullest potential. But, a mere tribesman, what exactly did he have in his hands? What did he rely on? The giant tortoise that was blocking the wall of fire raised its head and roared. The tortoise's palms that came into contact with the wall of fire and stepped on the barrier at the bottom shook violently. Countless flames once again exploded from the wall of fire and the barrier at the bottom. Accompanying this was a tremor that could make people fall apart. The Yi family had a giant totemic formation protecting them. Even if there was a tremor, the impact would be greatly reduced. Before this, Xiao Xian was the one who was affected the most. However, at this moment, Xiao Xian's figure stood firmly in the middle of the flame giant that had suddenly appeared. With the pressure gone, Xiao Xian had a rare moment to catch his breath. However, Yi Xiang did not intend to give Xiao Xian the chance to recover. He raised his arm and swung it at Xiao Xian. As Yi Xiang swung his arm, the wall of fire, which had been stopped by the giant tortoise, surged towards Xiao Xian like a flood breaking through a dam. Xiao Xian could feel the overwhelming pressure coming at him, but he had no choice but to face it head-on. He could not retreat, there was no way out. Under the impact of the orange-red waves of fire, the huge crimson figure took a few steps back from the initial impact and slowly stabilized itself. Then, step by step, it walked forward. The giant's body was surrounded by waves of fire. It was difficult for him to move. Every step he took was accompanied by a huge impact, as if he was going against the current. Chapter 800. The torrent of flames grew stronger. Xiao Xian could feel the resistance in front of him increasing. Every step was heavier. The most obvious sign of this was that the ground shook violently with every step the flame giant took. The torrent of flames suddenly split into several streams, rising up like fire snakes and rushing towards the flame giant. The crimson figure waved its arms, its huge palms carrying a ferocious aura. There were no fancy tricks, its movements were not as clumsy as its size suggested. It was fast, direct and domineering, pressing down on the oncoming fire snakes. It was as if no creature could escape from its palms. All the fire snakes exploded at the same time. The fire snakes shattered into countless balls of fire, scattering in all directions. The wind created by the flame giant's arms swept away the flames in front of Xiao Xian. Yi Tuan stared blankly at the moving red figure. He still could not understand. What was Xiao Xian's giant? He could only vaguely sense that it was different from the bone-reading beasts they used. A giant of this size should not exist in this world. Perhaps there was another reason for its size. But Yi Tuan did not dwell on it. He did not have time to think about Xiao Xian's flame giant. He was also shocked by Xiao Xian's strong vitality. He thought that the tribesmen would have disappeared in the battle between the giant tortoise and Yi Xiang. But now, not only was Xiao Xian alive and kicking, he was even causing such a huge commotion. Was this the chance of survival that had finally appeared as he had divined before? His ancestor's bone oracle could not create a crack in the boundary. Then what about the tribesmen? Would they see a chance of survival in the midst of danger? At this thought, Yi Tuan focused again, searching for any possible cracks in the boundary. They would retreat as soon as a crack appeared. He could see that Yi Xiang was more hostile towards Xiao Xian than them. Even without looking, he could sense that Yi Xiang had diverted more forces to deal with the tribesmen. Yi Tuan admitted that Xiao Xian's flame giant was impressive and powerful. It might not lose to their ancestor's bone oracle, but it might not last long against Yi Xiang's attacks. However, Yi Tuan did not care. In fact, he was secretly delighted. Yi Xiang's attention was on Xiao Xian, that meant they had more time to escape. As for Xiao Xian's life, Yi Tuan did not care. More and more flames surged out of the wall, and the red giant's steps slowed. Everyone knew that he was reaching his limit, and when he could no longer stand, he would be engulfed by the torrent of flames. When that happened, Xiao Xian would be finished too. The Yi family was relieved that Yi Xiang did not use this move on them. Even with the giant tortoise and the totemic formation of 100 people, they might not have lasted as long as the tribesmen. Xiao Xian could feel the power flowing through his body reaching its peak. Every part of his body felt like an overloaded machine, crackling and rattling as if it would fall apart at any moment. His feet felt as if they were bound by solid and heavy chains. Even if it was just a small distance, it was extremely difficult for him to walk, let alone stand firm and withstand the torrent of flames that was constantly rushing towards him. He could not retreat. Even if it was just a small step, one step back would lead to a second step, a third step, until he was overwhelmed and drowned. All the white power in his body began to circulate. Xiao Xian no longer felt cold. Instead, his blood felt like it was boiling from the constant flow of power, steam spewing out of his body. At this moment, Xiao Xian suddenly realized that in his sea of consciousness, the white egg-shaped barrier that had been covering the totemic flames had started to melt. The shield gradually turned white and flowed outwards. Soon, there was no trace of the shield on the outer layer of the totemic flames. Although the white veil had disappeared, Xiao Xian did not feel the white energy leaving him. It was still around him and had not left. Not only that, Xiao Xian also felt that they were in his control. His five senses, which had been somewhat numb, sharpened again. The pressure around him was also rapidly decreasing, as if someone had moved a mountain that had been pressing down on him. His body suddenly felt lighter, and even his breathing became smoother. Within Yi Xiang's orange-red flames, the giant red figure stopped advancing but did not retreat. It stood there like a silent thinker. Within the Yi family's totemic array, the people who had been watching Xiao Xian thought to themselves, is he finally unable to hold on? However, in the next moment, they suddenly felt a huge pressure coming from that direction. It was even stronger than when the Crimson Giant had appeared. What was going on? Even Yi Tuan, who had been searching for a crack in the barrier, could not help but look over. He felt a strong sense of apprehension, even fear. Over there, it seemed like something that had been sleeping for a long time was about to appear. "It's the totemic energy," exclaimed an elder beside Yi Tuan. When the fire seed's power formed a totem, it would emit energy waves unique to it. Before this, Xiao Xian had appeared and left without a totem under his feet. This overturned the Yi family's understanding. Logically speaking, even if Xiao Xian had mastered part of the Yi family's divination skills and could enter this place, a totem would have appeared whenever a person appeared. But they had never seen a Yanjiao totem appear under Xiao Xian's feet. Was the kid finally forming a totem? No, he was just starting to form a totem. This was unbelievable to the Yi family. He could not even form a totem, yet he was able to walk around peacefully. This totem had come too late. Also, why was there such a huge commotion when the kid formed a totem? Just the early stages of the totem's formation already gave off a great pressure. Was Yanjiao's totem really that powerful? Wait, that's not Yanjiao's totem. Yi Tuan was shocked. He sensed something strange. That's definitely not Yanjiao's totem. But what I sensed was the prelude to the totem's appearance. If it's not Yanjiao's totem, what is it? Asked the elder beside Yi Tuan. Just as the Yi family members were guessing, the flood that was about to drown the crimson figure was suddenly pushed aside, as if it had met with an obstacle. It was as if a pair of invisible hands had blocked the onslaught of flames. Around the flame giant, the torrent of flames that had been constantly attacking the flame giant was separated. But Yi Tuan's group and Yi Xiang did not pay much attention to this. They were staring at the white flames that had suddenly appeared under the crimson giant's feet. Two white lines of fire crisscrossed, forming 8 at each end. The two lines of fire looked like two elongated gongs, stacked vertically and horizontally. The two crisscrossing work runes were still expanding, and the torrents of flames were also blocked. The space around the flame giant was also getting bigger and bigger. What the hell is that? Someone shouted. He had never seen a tribe's totem in that shape. Wasn't that a Yanjiao? Wasn't Yanjiao's totem double-horned? Why was this happening? Many in the Yi family's totem formation took several steps back uncontrollably, as if a great pressure was pushing them away. Even Yi Tuan took great effort to steady himself. He did not retreat but still felt an oppressive pressure. If he had a physical body, he would have coughed up blood. If one could see Yi Tuan's eyes, they would see shock and fear in them, as though he had seen something unimaginably terrifying. That's. Yi Tuan felt a cold electric current coursing through every hair on his body. His hair stood on end as he shivered. Fear. Worry. In that moment, these emotions were pushed to the back. Yi Tuan's only thought was, why did this pattern appear in this situation? The atmosphere was a little strange. Even those who did not understand what the dual rune represented could feel the uneasiness of the three elders led by Yi Tuan. Their hearts sank. The white flames in the shape of a cross caused the entire battlefield to stop momentarily. Yi Xiang's hand trembled as he held the bracelet. The flame giant's appearance did not affect Yi Xiang, but the white flame pattern did. On Xiao Xian's side, changes did not stop because of the double-horn pattern. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a tyrannical force rushing up from under his feet. As the white flames expanded, the force became more intense, as if it wanted to break through everything around it and crush everything in its path. Xiao Xian's figure, which was originally made of flames, seemed to merge with the flame giant when it appeared. But now, white flames appeared from all parts of Xiao Xian's body, pulling behind him. Xiao Xian's figure became clear again. Half a step behind Xiao Xian, the white light that seeped out began to gather again, no longer spreading in other directions. The gathering ball of light continued to expand. Even the light from Yi Tuan's oracles paled in comparison. If the giant tortoise's white light was like the stars in the night sky, then the white light gathering behind Xiao Xian was like the sun that illuminated the world. The white light gathered to form a blurry figure. It was not large, like a clone of Xiao Xian, but the flames were different so it was not clear. Based on the Yi family standard, the blurry figure was like Xiao Xian when he first arrived, an unstable newbie who could vanish at any time. But contrary to the Yi family's perception, the moment the white blurry figure appeared, the three-way stalemate on the battlefield changed again. Due to the appearance of the white doublework runes, a large area of empty space was revealed around the flame giant. From time to time, some white flames would jump up and down, and the tyrannical might that the flame giant displayed was several times stronger than when it first appeared. In this situation, the Yi family's totemic array appeared weaker. Yi Tuan felt stifled, a mouthful of blood stuck in his throat. He could neither swallow nor spit it out. The Yi family had 100-man array and the help of their ancestors' oracles. Yi Xiang was an old monster who had lived for more than 1,000 years, a once-in-a-thousand-years genius in the Yi family. And Xiao Xian? What did he have? He was just a barbaric tribesman. Yi Tuan felt stifled. But when he thought about how Xiao Xian's transformation could cause trouble for Yi Xiang and create an opportunity for them to retreat, Yi Tuan felt much better. But, why did he see that huge figure with white runes charging towards them? Chapter 801. The flame body was sturdy and solid, as if it was a real person. The crimson flame giant seemed to have broken free of its chains and mud. Its steps were light, free, carefree. The giant's steps quickened, from walking to running. The roaring of the flames on his body was like the roars of thousands of ferocious beasts. Each of them was roaring, and when they gathered together, they emitted an earth-shattering pressure. Wind and fire swirled around the giant's body as it ran, flames as sharp as knives bursting outwards with each step. Yi Tuan had thought that the tribesmen would attack Yi Xiang after his transformation. After all, Yi Xiang was the one who trapped them here. If they worked together, they would have a chance of breaking out of this boundary. However, no one expected the powerful crimson giant to change its path and charge towards the Yi family. The white pattern beneath the giant's feet kept the flames at bay. Yi Tuan could see a figure at the giant's feet. The figure was almost one with the flames on the giant's body, but the color was darker and blurrier. Still, he could see a figure standing there. It was Xiao Xian, the one who created the flame giant. Other than Xiao Xian, there was another figure behind him, glowing with a white light that could not be ignored. It was almost the same size as Xiao Xian. No one knew what the white figure was, but everyone who saw it instinctively felt uneasy. The three silhouettes moved in unison, as if they were a single entity. Why is he running towards us? Someone in the Yi family's totemic formation asked in a trembling voice as he saw the approaching figure. I don't know, he's not going to fight us with Yi Xiang, is he? I knew that tribesman was with Yi Xiang. They're definitely working together. They had just been wondering what the white flame pattern was, but now they were too frightened to think about anything else. They stared straight at the crimson giant. Yi Tuan and the other two thought that Xiao Xian had changed his mind at the last minute and was going to fight them with Yi Xiang. If that was the case, they would have no chance of escaping. Yi Xiang alone was troublesome enough. With the addition of this strange tribesman, they were in a dire situation. They might even be wiped out. However, as the flame giant got closer and closer, they noticed that the flame giant wasn't charging towards them, but towards the enormous tortoise that was blocking the wall of flames. The giant tortoise. The tribesman's target was the giant tortoise. What's he doing? Was he really going to fight them with Yi Xiang? Without the protection of the giant tortoise, the flame wall would come straight for them. Even with the protection of the totem array, they might not be able to survive under the pressure of the flame wall. However, in next to no time, all their surprise, bewilderment, and anxiousness were tossed to the back of their minds. Because they saw a scene that caused their scalps to go numb, and they were astounded to the point they were unable to make a sound. It was as if someone had choked their throats, and a coldness that caused their entire bodies to be on the verge of being frozen arose within them. They saw the flame giant grab the giant tortoise's tail, which was almost as long as its shell, and drag it away from the wall of fire. The tortoise's claws, which had been blocking the wall of fire, shot out sparks as they left the wall. Ignoring the approaching wall of flames and the surging waves of orange-red flames, the flame giant grabbed the tortoise's tail with its two large hands and pulled it back. The flames that kept surging out of the barrier at the bottom were pulled back by the giant tortoise, as if they were pushed against the waves of the sea. Even though the giant tortoise was only made of flames, it was as heavy as a mountain. Every step the giant took caused the ground to tremble even more violently. His originally brisk steps became heavy once again. Xiao Xian could feel the bones in his body making cracking sounds. It was as if his entire body was once again in an overloaded state. All of his strength was unleashed without reservation. The immense pain from overloading his body gave Xiao Xian an indescribable sense of pleasure. Every ball of fire on the giant's body seemed to become a part of Xiao Xian. He was only standing at the giant's feet. When he looked at the tortoise and the wall of fire, he struggled to lift his head. But now, Xiao Xian no longer felt that way. He looked at Yi Tuan and the others at the same level. The giant's gaze was his gaze. The giant's hand was his hand. Flames spewed out of the flame giant's body like burning blood. Xiao Xian felt like he was on an ancient battlefield, fighting with all his might. Live or die. If he didn't want to die, he had to fight. The giant's flaming arms dragged the tortoise's long tail. It roared as if it wanted to tear apart the world of fire. The rising flames seemed to be cheering it on. Under the flames, Xiao Xian felt a strange emotion brewing in him, ready to burst out at any moment. Xiao Xian felt like this was the fiercest eruption he had ever unleashed since he came to this world. It was also the most complete fusion with the strange white power. The giant tortoise's four palms left the ground. Its enormous body was forcefully lifted into the air. Everyone who saw this scene fell into a daze. This was Yi Tuan's first time witnessing and experiencing Yanjiao's brutality. Yi Tuan had a vague guess as to what the flame giant wanted to do. Stop! Stop! Yi Tuan wanted to roar, but he found that he could not. All his composure was gone. The giant did not seem to be wielding a giant tortoise, but a giant meteor hammer. It easily dispersed the torrents of orange flames coming from Yi Xiang's fiery wall. The scattered flames howled like beasts caught in a hurricane. The crimson flames around the giant continued to rise, bursting with even more power. The crisscrossing, gong pattern under its feet grew brighter. As the giant tortoise was spun faster and faster, the giant's arms that were holding onto the tortoise's tail swelled once again. Dozens of streams of flame burst forth from the tortoise's body, as if it could not suppress the blood that was spurting out. However, the movements of the giant's arms did not slow down, and the hands that were holding onto the tortoise's tail did not relax. When the strength reached a peak, the tortoise's spinning motion changed. Turn leg, turn body, smash. He swung his arms fiercely, propelling his tortoise body. The tortoise's back smashed down fiercely like a meteor hammer. In that instant, when the power reached its peak, the flame giant's figure blurred, including Xiao Xian's and the white figure behind Xiao Xian. The blurry silhouette was like a bonfire blown by the wind, about to disappear in the next moment. However, it felt completely different. The three figures merged into one. A heroic howl seemed to pierce through time and space, drowning out the sound of the wind and fire, drowning out the giant tortoise's angry roar, drowning out everything. Yi Tuan felt as if he was looking at the soul of a flame that had burned for billions of years. Boom! It was as if countless thunderbolts had exploded at the same time. The deafening boom made everyone lose their sense of hearing. Their nerves were numb from the shock. No one could remain unaffected by this. Even the Yi family's totemic formation was shaken to the point of dispersing. Even with the protection of the Yi family's totemic formation, the totemic formation was also shaken to the point that it looked like it was going to collapse at any moment. The torrent of flames that rushed over were all dispersed in an instant, and the exploding flames filled every corner of the enchantment. The flames that formed the array beneath everyone's feet were thrown high into the air. Countless curtains of fire, accompanied by fireballs of various sizes, rushed upwards like meteors. They were frail figures trapped in the curtains of fire and meteors, so minuscule that they could be easily dispersed. It was as if the entire world was being turned upside down. The sealed enchantment, under the huge impact and vibration, revealed the dark background below. If one looked down from above, they would see many black cracks on the enchantment below. They were like black lightning that appeared in the fire, constantly twisting and changing shape in the vibration. Yi Tuan looked at the array beneath his feet, at the black cracks that looked like twisting pythons. His mind, which had been in deep thought, went blank for a moment. His voice trembled. It's broken. However, no one could hear him now. Everyone was under the immense pressure of the world being turned upside down. The Yi family's biggest pillar of support, the totem formation guarded by 100 people, was like a fire seed. The orange-red flame at the core of the totem formation was like a candle flickering in the wind. No one knew how long it could last. However, in this world of fire, the huge, crisscrossing duplex character pattern formed by white flames was like a mark deeply engraved on a hard rock. No matter how the fire hit it, no matter how the surroundings shook, it still maintained the clear shape of the pattern, as if nothing in this world could change it. Chapter 802. In the heavily guarded courtyard of the Yi family's mansion. The tense atmosphere grew heavier. Those who could not keep their cool paced in circles anxiously, not daring to make a sound lest they disturb the people in the courtyard. The broken bone in front of Yi Tuan had already made their hearts sink. When no second bone broke, they heaved a sigh of relief. However, they waited and waited. Days passed. Although the courtyard was undisturbed by the totem, many could no longer maintain their composure. It was not physical torture, but psychological pressure. Some wanted to wait, but the waiting only made them extremely haggard. Their footsteps were light, as if they had not eaten or slept well for days. There were many such people. Some even fainted while waiting. The mental and psychological pressure was unbearable even if they did not do anything physically taxing. Moreover, this had been going on for a long time. It's good news that there's no movement. Someone thought. At the very least, there were no signs of broken bones or broken stones. It seemed that the situation over there was still stable. Nothing must happen. Otherwise, the E family will be in trouble. The people around the E family were anxious. Ever since the E family closed their doors, there had been a constant stream of people coming to investigate. Some were from the other 5 tribes in the royal city, while others were from other places. Although they seemed to be worried for the E family, they had ill intentions. If the E family was in danger, they would take advantage of the situation. Friendship. In the face of benefits, the 6 tribes in the royal city never cared about friendship. If any of the other tribes were in danger, the E family would also intervene. Therefore, as fortune-tellers, they knew better than anyone what the consequences would be. On this day, after a short rest, they returned to the courtyard. Go back and rest. We'll keep watch. The leader said to the people in front. Now, there were 2 groups of people taking turns to guard and rest. In front of them was a man sitting on a leather cushion near Yi Tuan. He had dark circles under his eyes and his eyes were lifeless. His hair was messy and his clothes were stained with mud. This would never have happened in the past, but now, everyone was used to it and no one cared. Just as the 2 groups were about to switch, the person who got up from the beast hide massaged his numb and stiff legs. He was about to say something when he shuddered and looked at Yi Tuan's group. In the courtyard, the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand glowed brightly. The bone pieces in the shell jumped rapidly. Everyone stared at the tortoise shell in disbelief. Naturally, they knew what the changes to the tortoise shell meant. He even used the oracle bone artifact left behind by his ancestors. Is Yi Xiang really that powerful? I wonder how the battle is going. Many people whispered. No matter how much they tried to comfort others, there was only one thought in their minds: danger. Yi Tuan was forced to use his ancestors' oracle bone artifact. What kind of dire situation was that? Seeing this, the people who were supposed to take turns to rest did not leave. They returned to guard the courtyard. How could they be in the mood to eat at a time like this? They would not be able to sleep even if they went back. Just like that, the days passed. The people in the courtyard grew more haggard. The guards outside the mansion also grew restless. Everyone was panicking and some were already having other thoughts. After a period of time, the weather gradually became hotter. The people who were guarding the courtyard, although they were sweating profusely due to their anxiety, felt waves of coldness from their bones. Something was wrong. Something seemed to be suppressing the totem formation again. It felt like it could not hold on any longer. Suddenly, the totem in the courtyard grew brighter. The energy waves from the totem became more obvious and unstable, as if a hammer was pounding on it. What's wrong? What's going on? They did not know what was going on and could only worry. Not long after, they heard a crisp, crack sound. The sound was not loud, but it was as if their nerves had been snapped. The people in the courtyard stared at the tortoise shell in Yi Tuan's hand, their eyeballs about to fall out. Their faces were pale, large beads of sweat rolling down their foreheads. They did not even bother to wipe it off, petrified as they stared at the tortoise shell. Impossible. Impossible. The person closest to Yi Tuan stared at the tortoise shell, his lips trembling as he spoke with a sharp, piercing voice. On the turtle shell in Yi Tuan's hand, where even the Gongjia family's sharpest sword would not be able to leave a mark, there was now a crack in the shell. Soon, they did not have time to stare at the tortoise shell because the totem in the courtyard was flashing even more violently. It could not even maintain its shape. It was about to break the formation. Wu, the totem that almost covered the entire courtyard, flashed rapidly before exploding. Sparks flew like meteors across the night sky and were extinguished. The people in the courtyard gasped. The person closest to Yi Tuan strode forward to support Yi Tuan. Before he could ask, Yi Tuan spat out a mouthful of blood and roared, "That Yanjiao." After that, Yi Tuan's eyes rolled back and he fainted. The other two elders beside Yi Tuan were not unconscious, but they were not much better off. Their faces were pale and they looked older than ever. They struggled to keep their eyes open and their withered bark-like hands trembled. If not for someone supporting them, they would not have been able to sit and would have fallen to the ground. Behind Yi Tuan and the other two, in the 100-strong formation, many people had fainted with blood oozing out of their orifices. It was difficult to tell how badly they were injured, but everyone who saw this knew that they had lost this battle. They had lost terribly. The Yi family was in for a major upheaval. As for what Yi Tuan said before he fainted, some people began to ponder. Wasn't he going to fight Yi Xiang? Why would Yi Tuan mention Yanjiao? And the first thing he said was Yanjiao. He did not even mention Yi Xiang. Yanjiao. Why would Yanjiao be involved? The Yi family was in chaos. In the royal city, the other tribes who had been keeping an eye on the Yi family also heard the news and began to move. Far away from the royal city, on another continent, at the foot of a mountain range near Eagle Mountain. Xiao Xian suddenly opened his eyes and took a few deep breaths. The feeling of dizziness and exhaustion faded a little, but his muscles were still trembling. The feeling of overload was still there, and his clothes were all soaked in sweat. Cha-Cha heard the noise and hurried over to call out to him. I'm fine. Xiao Xian waved his hand weakly. Even raising his arm was difficult. After resting for a while, Xiao Xian felt that he had recovered some of his strength and slowly stood up. Only then did he realize that the place where he was originally sitting had a crisscrossing double I pattern. It looked like a mark left behind after the rocks on the ground had been melted. After thinking for a while, Xiao Xian still couldn't understand why this happened. The rumbling of his stomach made Xiao Xian feel very hungry. He got up and walked towards the forest, planning to find something to eat first. After a few steps, Xiao Xian sensed movement from Yi Zhong's side. He looked over and saw Yi Qi glaring at him with bloodshot eyes. You! Yi Qi pointed a trembling finger at Xiao Xian. He spat out a few more mouthfuls of blood and fainted. Chapter 803. Xiao Xian ignored Yi Qi and Yi Zhong. They didn't seem to be in good condition, especially Yi Qi. He was severely injured and fainted after uttering only one word. The panicked slaves were trying to save him. Xiao Xian looked away. He was starving and his vision was blurry after just a few steps. He forced himself to set up a trap. With his current strength, he couldn't take the initiative to hunt. While guarding the trap, Xiao Xian ate some of the meat Cha-Cha brought back. However, Cha-Cha ate raw meat and Xiao Xian didn't have the time to light a fire to roast the meat, so he ate raw meat as well. When hunting in the tribe, they often encountered situations where it wasn't appropriate to light a fire. It wasn't rare to eat raw meat. While waiting for the prey, Xiao Xian noticed that something was wrong with the surroundings. He didn't notice it before, but after eating and resting, he noticed that the forest was strange. Xiao Xian remembered that it was already winter when he came here. Although the weather here didn't change much throughout the year, there were still changes in the trees. When Xiao Xian arrived, the trees had already borne fruit. Now, there were no traces of fruit on the trees. There were no rotten fruits on the ground either. Xiao Xian climbed to a high vantage point and looked into the distance. The strange feeling in his heart intensified. Xiao Xian suddenly felt a familiar aura approaching quickly. It was almost silent. Not long after, a figure appeared in the forest. Ganxie. Xiao Xian looked at the person in surprise. Gan Xie was wearing a gray hemp cloak. Since it was daytime, he still wore a hood as usual. Xiao Xian didn't expect to see Gan Xie here. Why are you here? I'm looking for you. Gan Xie looked around. His gaze lingered on Yi Zong and Yi Qi for a few seconds before he turned to Xiao Xian. You've been gone for too long. The Yanjiao people are worried. I was gone for a long time. Xiao Xian knew that the flow of time in that strange dark world was different from the flow of time in the real world, but he only thought that he had stayed there for 10 days at most. In a few days, there will be a full moon. Gan Xie didn't say how long he had been gone, but Xiao Xian knew that he had been gone for more than half a year. It was no wonder that the Yanjiao people were so anxious. They said they were going to investigate the movements of the royal city people who had entered the forest, but in the end, it took them more than half a year. Winter had long passed, and the rainy season had ended. Xiao Xian knew that Gan Xie wouldn't lie about this. They would know when they looked at the moon at night. He also believed Gan Xie's words. He had really left for more than half a year. No wonder the forest gave him such a strange feeling. Xiao Xian remembered that before he entered the world of darkness, winter had not yet passed. How could half a year have passed in the blink of an eye? To Xiao Xian, that battle had only been half a day, but in the real world, so much time had passed. It was hard to imagine that a battle that had taken more than half a year. I haven't heard from you, so I came to take a look. Gan Xie said simply, the others can't sense your exact location, but your shaman seems to be able to. She can't leave the tribe, so she can only point out a general direction for the search team. Gan Xie briefly told Xiao Xian why he was here. The Yanjiao tribe had discussed going into the forest to search for Xiao Xian, but Gan Xie volunteered that he could sense Xiao Xian's exact location and they could search for him in the forest. Gan Xie didn't like traveling with others. When he joined the other tribes in the Flaming River Basin to hunt, he treated it like a game. The others were afraid of him, and he didn't want to travel with them. That was why when Yanjiao suggested sending a team to go with him, Gan Xie refused. That was indeed the case. It was much more convenient and relaxing for Gan Xie when he was alone compared to when he was with others. Xiao Xian studied Gan Xie and nodded, not bad, your complexion is much rosier. Looks like you've been doing well in the forest. Gan Xie's pale complexion had regained some color, but it was still slightly rosier than a normal person's. Now, Xiao Xian noticed that Gan Xie's complexion was filled with vitality, and he didn't look sickly or pale. How much blood did he suck to have such a change? As for why Gan Xie was able to find Xiao Xian, it was mainly because of the power Xiao Xian used to revive him. That special power affected Gan Xie, allowing him to come back from the brink of death. It also allowed him to find Xiao Xian's location. With his immortal body, Gan Xie had an easier time in the forest compared to others. Did everything go well? How's the tribe doing while I was gone? Xiao Xian asked. Gan Xie thought about it and said, it's going well. This was to tell Xiao Xian that his journey had been smooth. The Yanjiao tribe was doing well too. Xiao Xian didn't plan on getting too much information from Gan Xie. After all, Gan Xie was a man of few words, and he didn't seem to be interested in anything. However, just as Xiao Xian thought that Gan Xie would start to think about life again, Gan Xie spoke. I met a bat, a big bat. It's half a step away from becoming a beast king. It should be the one you mentioned before. Gan Xie gestured with his hand to outline the bat's size. The one from the Bat Mountain. Xiao Xian frowned. That bat wasn't easy to deal with. Did you lose to it? Gan Xie shook his head with a strange expression. No. Gan Xie had met that bat when he was hunting for food. Both of them liked to hunt at night and they both drank blood. Both of them seemed to have a natural instinct for which beast's blood tasted better. Their hunting targets were very similar as well, so it wasn't strange for them to meet. The strange thing was, how did Gan Xie escape from the bat's claws? In response to Xiao Xian's confusion, Gan Xie told him what happened. Not only did Gan Xie not lose to the bat's claws, but he also got along well with the bat. The bat didn't attack Gan Xie. Instead, Gan Xie gave the bat some prey and the bat accepted it. After that, the bat helped Gan Xie get rid of two beasts that were difficult to deal with. When Xiao Xian heard about this from Gan Xie, he was also quite surprised. "With your strength, how would you fare against the giant bat?" asked Xiao Xian. "No," Gan Xie said without hesitation. His immortal body didn't mean that he couldn't be killed. There were limits to his abilities. Even though he hadn't really fought against the bat, he knew the difference between them. He wasn't confident that he could win. "But it has a familiar aura. It's similar to mine," Gan Xie said as he looked at Xiao Xian. "Is that bat connected to you?" "Connected?" Xiao Xian thought for a moment and briefly told Gan Xie about his first encounter with the bat. He only left out the part about mining fire crystals. The fire crystal mine was a secret of the Yinjiao tribe. Only a few people in the Yinjiao tribe knew about it. After all, Gan Xie wasn't a Yinjiao. Xiao Xian wouldn't tell him about the fire crystals. Xiao Xian emphasized how the bat competed with the other bat candidates to become the leader of the bat swarm. Xiao Xian still remembered that he was holding on to the fire crystal. Without him noticing, the power of the fire crystal was absorbed by the bat that was still evolving. After that, the bat was the first to complete its transformation and killed all the other bat candidates. In the end, it became the leader of the bat swarm. Perhaps it was because it absorbed the power released by Xiao Xian's fire crystal during its evolution that the bat had a similar aura to the Yinjiao tribe. This was also the main reason why it didn't attack the Yinjiao tribe. Although the bat had a similar aura to the Yinjiao tribe, it had another aura that was different from the Yinjiao tribes. It was an aura that came from Xiao Xian's body. This aura was stronger than the Yinjiao's aura. Gan Xie was able to come back to life because Xiao Xian used another type of power. Therefore, to the bat, Gan Xie was more similar to it than the other Yinjiao tribesmen. They were more of the same kind and closer. After what happened in the strange dark world, Xiao Xian had a better understanding of the white power in his body. Gan Xie's situation must have something to do with it. Now that he thought about it, it made sense. "What are you looking at?" Xiao Xian turned his head and saw that Gan Xie seemed to be looking for something. "There's the smell of blood," said Gan Xie. "Blood? Oh, there are two people from the Yi family and their slaves over there." Xiao Xian pointed in the direction of Yi Zong and Yi Qi. "No, it's not them." Gan Xie shook his head. "I can smell their blood, but I'm not looking for their blood. Their blood definitely smells better than the other tribesmen's, but there's another type of blood here that smells even better." Gan Xie sniffed carefully and scanned his surroundings like a radar. Finally, he looked up. "It's there. It's coming from up there." Gan Xie's eyes flashed red and his long fangs grew out of his mouth. He lifted his leg and was about to charge up the mountain. His entire body exuded a murderous aura. From the flaming river to here, Gan Xie must have seen blood everywhere he went. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a strong murderous aura. Xiao Xian hurriedly stopped Gan Xie. "Don't be rash. Keep your fangs and your murderous aura. This is the territory of the giant mountain eagles. Don't move around carelessly. Be careful. As for what's up there." Xiao Xian thought for a moment. "Let me eat something first. After I recover, I'll go up with you." Gan Xie retracted his gaze and paused. Then, he nodded. "All right." He could feel a strong aura around here. It wasn't the aura of a living creature, but it made him nervous. If it wasn't for the murderous aura, he wouldn't have wanted to stay here. However, the smell from the mountain excited him and made him willing to take the risk. What was at the top of the mountain? Xiao Xian wondered. There weren't many beasts in this long mountain range. The higher up they went, the fewer animals there were. Besides the giant mountain eagles that came from afar, there was nothing else. No. There were exceptions up there. Those white worms. Xiao Xian remembered the white worms that broke out of the ground and ran up the mountain. He turned to Cha-Cha and asked, "Did those white worms come down?" Cha-Cha looked at the top of the mountain and then at Xiao Xian. He shook his head. They didn't come down. There were so many white worms up there, but they didn't come down. Xiao Xian thought back to the first time he came here. Back then, the white worms would steal the ice crystals on the top of the mountain. Then, they would transform in their nests and turn into butterflies. Moreover, it was almost the full moon now. Xiao Xian saw the white worms that turned into butterflies at this time too. Xiao Xian still remembered what the white worms looked like when they turned into butterflies. The blood that Cha-Cha mentioned was most likely the white worms. If it was the giant mountain eagles, Gan Xie wouldn't be this excited even after knowing Cha-Cha for so long. Whether it was the white worms or something else on the mountain, Xiao Xian decided that he would go up and take a look when he recovered. He still remembered why Yi Zong and the rest were here. Xiao Xian also wanted to know if the white worms had any other secrets. Perhaps they had something to do with forging. It was rare for him to come here, he wouldn't be satisfied if he didn't find out. While Xiao Xian stared at the mountain and planned his next move, a tense atmosphere hung in the desert. It had been like this for half a year and the cause was the change in the desert's ruler, Rock Hill City. Shi Shu and his men looked nervously at a sand dune in the distance. There was an underground palace at the bottom of the dune. Yi Xiang was in there. Shi Shu knew what Yi Xiang was doing. He knew that Yi Xiang would be in there for a long time but he didn't expect it to be this long. Although Shi Shu had confidence in Yi Xiang, the longer this went on, the more he felt a sense of foreboding. The Yi family was nothing to worry about. If Yi Xiang was here, it wouldn't take this long. What was going on? Shi Shu had been thinking about it for the past few days. Now, he knew that his hunch was right. There was a loud boom, as if a giant beast was crashing into the ground. Sand flowed down the dune in front of them like water. The entire dune caved in with the boom and the ground shook. The place where the underground palace was built was relatively sturdy but now, it seemed to have turned into quicksand, swallowing the entire dune. Retreat! Shi Shu shouted for the team to retreat quickly because the scope of the quicksand was rapidly expanding. Boom! Two silhouettes rushed out of the sunken area, creating a large hole. Then, 3 more silhouettes rushed out one after another. The 3 figures that rushed out from behind gathered together to protect the person in the middle. The 5 figures that appeared were the puppets that Yi Xiang had placed in the underground palace. Shi Shu had seen them before when he entered the underground palace. His attention was not on the 5 puppets, but on the figure they were protecting. Yi Xiang, who was being protected from the underground palace, didn't look well. There was blood at the corner of his mouth and the wooden bracelet in his hand was broken. How could this be? Shi Shu was shocked. Due to Yi Xiang's injuries, Rock Hill City had to temporarily abandon some of its expansion plans. It didn't even care about the war at the coastline. The desert entered a period of relative peace. Chapter 804. Xiao Xian used 2 days to recover his strength. With his recovery speed, 2 days was considered very slow if he didn't suffer any serious internal or external injuries. In the past, he only needed a night's rest to regain his energy when he hunted, but this time, he was too exhausted. He couldn't recover in 1 night. Plus, they had to be well prepared to go to the top of the mountain to search for answers. If they couldn't keep up, it would be too late for regrets. In these 2 days, Gan Xie wasn't interested in anything else. He only asked Xiao Xian about Yi Xiang. After learning that Yi Xiang was indeed very strong, Don Xie stopped asking and stared at the top of the mountain all day long. No one knew what he was thinking. Yi Zong and Yi Qi were still heavily injured and couldn't walk. Yi Qi especially didn't wake up after he fainted. The slaves were so worried that they cried all day long. "Let's go." Xiao Xian jumped onto the eagle's back and patted Cha-Cha's back gently. Gan Xie was also on Cha-Cha's back. Cha-Cha reluctantly chirped before flying up. Cha-Cha rested a few times while carrying two people on his back. The higher they went, the thinner the air and the lower the temperature. The invisible pressure also became stronger. Gan Xie didn't like places that were too cold. The people of the Han tribe had always lived in hot deserts. Although their living habits had changed a lot after they became like this, he was still the same. Places full of ice and snow would restrict his movements. He didn't like this kind of environment at all. However, for the alluring smell of blood, Gan Xie was willing to take the risk. The higher they went, the fainter Gan Xie's breath became. He tried to minimize his presence. Firstly, the pressure from above made him nervous. Secondly, he wasn't used to the cold. He felt like a hibernating beast. Breathing wasn't necessary for him to begin with. Now that he stopped breathing, he looked like a stone statue, motionless on the eagle's back. After passing through layers of clouds, the water vapor in the air turned into ice particles and hit their faces. A layer of white appeared on their hair and clothes. "Wait. Go over there." Xiao Xian pointed in a direction and motioned for Cha-Cha to fly over. After finding a suitable landing point, Xiao Xian jumped down from the eagle's back and stood on a protruding rock. He pushed aside the thick layer of snow on the rock and dragged out a white worm skin. The white worm skin was the same color as the snow. At first glance, it was impossible to tell the difference. If it wasn't for Xiao Xian using his special vision, he wouldn't have been able to find it. When Xiao Xian first came here, he also picked up a few white worm skins to make protective clothing. White worm skins had good defensive properties and could be used in a fight. At the same time, there was something else that the Yinzhou people valued the most: it could protect them from the core seed. When Xiao Xian first came to Eagle Mountain, most of the white worm skins he brought back were already damaged. There weren't many of them to begin with. Every time they entered the cave where the core seed was stored, only a limited number of people could enter. The tribe had also discussed what to use as a replacement for the white worm skins. After all, it wasn't easy to come to Eagle Mountain and they might not be able to find white worm skins. It would be great if they could find a replacement. Unfortunately, they hadn't been able to find a suitable replacement. Now, Xiao Xian could bring back more worm skins. Xiao Xian touched the worm skins in his hands. He didn't know when the worms had thrown them down, but Xiao Xian guessed that it shouldn't have been too long ago. Xiao Xian rolled up the worm skin and tied it to his belt. He looked around and found a second worm skin nearby. He rolled it up and brought it along with him. He couldn't find a third worm skin within his field of vision. Xiao Xian did not search further. The most important thing now was to see if the worms above had any other secrets. He would search for the other worm skins after he was done with his urgent matters. After a short rest, Cha-Cha flew up again. Xiao Xian could feel that Cha-Cha was facing a lot of resistance, but Cha-Cha was happy to fly like this. Even though it wasn't going to enter Eagle Mountain this time, it was still excited to fly like this in a place like this. As it flew up, it raised its head. It was rare for it to be expressionless, but its eyes flashed with a red light. "We're close." They were getting closer and closer to the peak. "Over there." Gan Xie pointed in a direction. Xiao Xian gestured for Cha-Cha to fly over. They weren't at the peak yet, but he knew that even though the worms dared to steal from the giant mountain eagle's territory, they wouldn't dare to build their nests on the icy plains. They would keep a safe distance from the peak, so they didn't need to continue flying up to find the worms. Xiao Xian saw a worm nest on the mountain. It was the same as the one he saw the first time he came here. The worm nest was made from worm silk. They're changing. Xiao Xian looked at the hive. Because he had experienced it once, he knew very well that the white worm no longer left the hive. Instead, it stayed inside, quietly evolving. It's a full moon tonight. Xiao Xian looked at the sky. The sun hadn't set yet, so the surroundings were still bright. Gan Xie jumped down from the eagle's back. Perhaps it was because of the low temperature, his movements were a little stiff and not as smooth as usual. The surrounding environment and the thick layer of snow made Gan Xie very uncomfortable. However, the worm blood helped him endure the discomfort. To Xiao Xian's surprise, Gan Xie stopped after taking a few steps towards the worm nest. What's wrong? Is there a problem? Xiao Xian asked. No. Gan Xie stared at the worm nest. What did you find? You're not going to do anything? Xiao Xian asked again. It's not time yet. Gan Xie stood in the same spot, staring at the worm nest. It's not time yet. Xiao Xian didn't understand why Gan Xie said that. However, he was sure that what attracted Gan Xie was the white worms. Since it wasn't time yet, he would wait. Xiao Xian and Cha-Cha went up the mountain to eat some ice. Xiao Xian hadn't eaten the ice pillars in a long time and missed them. There were no giant mountain eagles on the mountain, so Xiao Xian didn't have to hide. Gan Xie didn't like the ice, so he didn't eat much. He only had eyes for the white worms that were still changing. As time passed, the sun gradually set. However, the sky didn't turn dark. 2 moons that had mostly overlapped appeared in the night sky. Gan Xie became more and more excited. His hands trembled and his eyes turned red. That night, under the overlapping moons, everything was as bright as day. Every year, when the 2 moons coincided, both the human tribes and the beasts in the forest would be affected. For the beasts that were more seriously affected by the moonlight, this night of the year was also the night they were most afraid of. However, there were no other beasts near the top of the mountain. Faint roars of beasts could be heard from afar. Even though they were near the top of the mountain and far from the ground, they could still hear the roars. One could imagine how loud the roars would be if they were on the ground. Tonight, the beasts would be especially excited. He wondered if Yizong and Yi Qi at the foot of the mountain would be able to avoid them. Creak creak, a soft sound could be heard. Xiao Xian stopped thinking about other things and looked towards the worm nest. Just like last year, Xiao Xian saw a white worm that looked like a butterfly without wings. It had 2 antennae on its head. The soft sound was the sound it made when it crawled out of the nest and on the snow. Xiao Xian looked at Gan Xie. Although Gan Xie was very excited, he did not move. If not for the red light in his eyes, he would still look like a statue. His presence was very weak. After the white insect crawled out of the nest, it headed towards a protruding rock. With a flash of white light, 2 long wings began to grow on both sides of the insect's body. Compared to the 2 outstretched wings, the insect's body was much smaller. The 2 wings were completely formed. As they flapped, there was a white fluorescence. The wings were like the many butterflies in the forest. After a slight pause, they flapped fiercely and left the snowy ground, flying into the distance. Star butterflies. This was the name that the people from the royal city mentioned. The night of the full moon was the only starlight under the bright sky. In the night sky, the 2 moons had completely overlapped. The world under the sky was as bright as day. Under such a sky, some white spots were not overshadowed by the moonlight at all. They flew up from the mountain. Those were the star butterflies from other parts of the mountain. The white worms that crawled up from the foot of the mountain had completed their transformation. Tonight, they all turned into star butterflies. The wind at the top of the mountain was very fierce. It was like a knife cutting across people's faces. Countless snowflakes were swept up and blown away. However, those flying star butterflies ignored the fierce cold wind and continued to fly higher and further. No one knew where they would fly to in the end. The first time he came here, Xiao Xian stared at the star butterflies for a long time. However, this time, he only shifted his attention after the star butterflies flew up. Gan Xie entered the worm's nest first. When Xiao Xian went over, he saw Gan Xie squatting on the ground. There was a puddle of something that looked like ice water where the white worm had been. Gan Xie stretched out a finger and drew on the puddle of ice water. Then, he put the finger that was soaked in the ice water into his mouth. This is it. Gan Xie's low voice was filled with excitement. This is it. This ice water. Looking at the puddle of ice water, Xiao Xian remembered the first time he came here. He had wondered where the shell of the pupa went when the white worms were transforming. At that time, Xiao Xian didn't see it. He thought that the star butterflies didn't have pupa shells when they were transforming. Now, it seemed that the pupa shells had disappeared when Xiao Xian came here. The ice in the puddle of ice water could be the pupa shells. Moreover, the ice was melting quickly and the water was evaporating. Without thinking too much, Xiao Xian took out a piece of worm skin and tied a simple knot to make a simple leather bag. He didn't have a bag that could hold liquids, so he could only use worm skin. Moreover, since it was from the star butterflies, it would be safer to use worm skin to store it. Regardless of whether it was related to forging or not, he would collect it first. Anything that caught Gan Xie's attention was definitely not ordinary. Plus, the white worm had too many secrets. The worm skin and silk were all very useful. The blood stains that Gan Xie found mysterious would definitely be a surprise to him. Are you in a hurry to drink it? If not, help me. Xiao Xian handed Gan Xie a bag made of worm skin. Gan Xie didn't say anything. He took the bag and left to look for the next nest. He didn't have Xiao Xian's special vision, but he could accurately find the next nest with his sense of smell. Since he had found his target, he wasn't in a hurry to consume it. Just like Xiao Xian said, he should collect as much as he could. He was in a hurry, so he had to collect as much as he could. After collecting the ice water into the bag and tightening the opening, Xiao Xian realized that the ice water in the bag had stopped melting. This was exactly what Xiao Xian wanted. He let out a sigh of relief. He was afraid that the ice water would continue to melt and vaporize in the bag. In the end, there would be nothing left in the bag. Xiao Xian and Gan Xie split up and collected the ice water that hadn't melted from the nests into the bag. If it had completely melted, they would collect the water. If it had completely evaporated, then there was nothing they could do. Cha-Cha also helped to look for nests. Once it found one, it called out for Xiao Xian to come over. Although Xiao Xian and Gan Xie were fast, they couldn't find all the nests. After going through 10 nests, they only found a small puddle of water. After a few more nests, there was nothing left. Xiao Xian couldn't do anything about this. Luckily, he had already collected the ice water from 10 nests. After tightening the opening of the bag, Xiao Xian put the bag aside and asked Cha-Cha to guard it. He then went to collect the worm silk from the nests. If he didn't collect it in time, the worm silk would slowly fall off the rocks and be blown away by the wind. The worm silk used to make nests was stuck tightly to the rocks. However, as long as he poured in his totemic power, he could easily pull the worm silk off the rocks. Xiao Xian had done this before, so it was easy for him to do it now. The worm silk was very light, much lighter than the worm skin. Moreover, it had many uses. Xiao Xian had already used up all the worm silk he collected. Now was the time to collect some more. It would be useful for setting up traps and hunting in the future. Gan Xie didn't know why Xiao Xian collected the worm silk, but he still helped. After all, if it wasn't for Xiao Xian bringing him up the mountain, it would have been difficult for him to climb the mountain alone. The environment on the mountain severely restricted his movements. He was only able to obtain the mysterious worm blood this time because of Xiao Xian's help. Therefore, if Xiao Xian wanted to collect worm skin and worm silk, of course he would help. The worm silk was fine. It was light and easy to carry. However, the worm skin was too heavy and difficult to find. The white worms liked to kick the skin down the mountain. This time, Xiao Xian found close to 20 before he stopped and continued his search. With the mysterious ice water, as well as the worm silk and worm skin, Xiao Xian went down the mountain. He was already very satisfied with the harvest from this trip. Chapter 805. It took a lot of time to collect the worm skin and worm silk. By the time they reached the foot of the mountain, the sun had already risen. The most violent period of the wild beasts in the forest had passed. After landing, Xiao Xian first looked for a place to place the things they brought down from the mountain. He sensed his surroundings. The two members of the Yi family didn't move. They didn't seem to have changed since Xiao Xian went up the mountain. However, Yi Qi was already awake. The two of them seemed to be discussing something. They were arguing in a low voice, accompanied by some coughing. Although Yi Qi was awake, he didn't seem to be in a good condition. Xiao Xian could guess Yi Qi's condition from the sound, so he wasn't in a hurry to check on him. Gan Xie was anxious. After landing, the temperature around them warmed up. The pressure from the mountain was also greatly reduced. Gan Xie felt much better. Of course, what excited him the most was the liquid he collected from the worm skin bag. This should be something like a pupa shell. It's just that it's different from a normal pupa shell, said Xiao Xian. It's blood. From Gan Xie's point of view, the ice water gave him the impression that it was blood. This was because he wasn't interested in anything else other than blood. The only thing that could make him so excited was blood. Since he had the worm blood, he naturally wanted to taste it. Gan Xie opened up a small opening in the worm skin bag and poured the liquid out into his mouth. Gan Xie drank 2 big gulps of the liquid. He then tied the worm skin bag around his neck and passed it to Xiao Xian. After drinking 2 mouthfuls of worm blood, Gan Xie's face was frighteningly pale. The redness from drinking the blood of many wild beasts in the forest had completely disappeared. Gan Xie's usually expressionless face twitched rapidly. His hand that was holding the worm skin bag was also trembling as if he was trying to suppress a great pain. Xiao Xian took the worm skin bag. Without asking any questions, Gan Xie left the place and dashed into the forest like a gust of wind. Xiao Xian looked at the disappearing figure and looked at the bag that Gan Xie handed to him. Although Gan Xie only drank 2 mouthfuls, each mouthful was more than a normal person's mouthful. The 2 mouthfuls had reduced the liquid in the bag by 1/3. This was the result of collecting more than 10 hives. Are you sure you're alright after drinking so much? Xiao Xian whispered. He did not dare to try it. He could feel that the liquid was not suitable for drinking. If he drank it casually, it would harm his body, just like the blood of the green-faced fanged beast. The shell that could protect the larvae might not be able to protect humans. It might even be more destructive than the green-faced fanged beast blood. This knowledge grew stronger as he collected the mysterious liquid. He no longer dared to treat it as normal beast blood. Initially, he wanted to tell Gan Xie his opinion. However, when he turned around, he saw that Gan Xie had drunk it. He didn't know how he was doing now. Xiao Xian asked Cha-Cha to follow him. However, Cha-Cha flew 1 round and quickly returned. Gan Xie's location was quite far from the foot of the mountain. There were more fearsome beasts there. Moreover, during the past full moon, many of the beasts were still in their berserk state. However, the strange thing was that the beasts that seemed to have gone berserk did not approach Gan Xie's location. Many of them even took a detour. Even Cha-Cha did not want to stay there and observe. After a while, a sharp whistle was heard. A strong murderous aura exploded. The wind blew, and the dense foliage in the forest was severely deformed. The strong wind was like a dancing blade. The whistling sound was chilling and murderous. There were some ferocious beasts in the forest. They were originally looking for prey and were planning to launch a surprise attack. However, under this sharp whistle, they were frightened by the sudden appearance of the fierce murderous aura. They quickly turned around and fled into the bushes further away. After the sharp whistle, a few beasts wailed. The wind was filled with the smell of blood. The startled flock of birds quickly flew away, and the herd of beasts also retreated. In just a moment, the forest, which was originally violent because of the full moon, suddenly became quiet. Only the smell of blood and slaughter was left in the wind, as if there was a dangerous demon hidden in the forest. The feathers on Cha-Cha's neck stood up. It immediately flew into the sky. When it felt that it was not safe, it would fly high. This was a kind of instinct. The 8 slaves who were guarding Yi Zong and his companion were also on guard. They looked around nervously. 2 of them had the same bloodline as Yi Si's green mantis. The spines on their backs were sticking out because of fear and panic. What happened? This was what everyone was thinking. Xiao Xian could tell that the smell was Gan Xie's. However, the smell of blood was mixed with the smell of beast blood. It was definitely not the smell of a small number of beasts. With such a strong smell of blood, at least 10 beasts had been killed. Why did Gan Xie suddenly kill so many beasts? Did he replenish his food supply? That couldn't be right. If he only wanted to eat, he wouldn't have killed so many beasts. So, was it because of the bug blood? Just as Xiao Xian was about to go over to take a look, the wind gradually stopped. The pungent smell of blood also gradually dissipated. Actually, it wasn't that the smell of blood had dissipated. It was just that the wind had weakened. The smell of blood was no longer carried in this direction. After a while, Xiao Xian sensed that Gan Xie was coming over. He stopped and looked over. Not long after, Gan Xie walked out of the forest. His cloak was messy and there was a large amount of beast blood splattered on it. He looked like he had just crawled out of a battlefield. His footsteps were heavy. He looked like he was injured. As Gan Xie walked over, the murderous aura on his body gradually disappeared. When he looked over at Xiao Xian, his eyes were still red. However, because he had retracted his aura, the murderous aura had faded. "What's wrong?" Xiao Xian asked. "It's nothing. It's just a small change," Gan Xie replied. Xiao Xian looked at Gan Xie carefully. Although Gan Xie looked a little tired, the sickly paleness was gone. In fact, he looked more like a normal person. The red light in his eyes had completely disappeared. If one didn't look at the fresh blood on his body, he looked no different from a normal person. However, Xiao Xian felt that Gan Xie had changed a lot. This change was probably positive for Gan Xie. Otherwise, Gan Xie wouldn't be so obsessed with the mysterious bug blood. "Do you still want to drink?" Xiao Xian handed over the bag of bug skin that Gan Xie drank from. When they went down the mountain, they had agreed that Yanjiao would take a third of the liquid that Gan Xie collected. Therefore, there was still a third of the liquid left for Gan Xie to drink. Gan Xie didn't say anything. After taking the bag, he drank another mouthful. However, this mouthful was much smaller than the first 2 mouthfuls. He wasn't in a rush either. It seemed like he was just casually tasting the liquid. After drinking, Gan Xie paused for a moment. Then, he handed the bag of bug skin back to Xiao Xian. "You can have the rest. You're not drinking anymore." Xiao Xian looked at Gan Xie in shock. He couldn't believe that Gan Xie could walk out of the forest alive after drinking the liquid. While he was waiting, he had already dipped his finger in a little bit of the liquid. He also knew that the liquid was something that Yanjiao people couldn't use. However, Gan Xie was an anomaly. He could handle things that other people couldn't handle. These things might be the kind of things that you guessed would be extremely useful for forging. I can feel that it's similar to the green-faced fanged blood from your tribe. Gan Xie explained in detail. Gan Xie was better at distinguishing blood than Xiao Xian. Since he said so, Xiao Xian's guess was much more likely to be correct. Is that all? Xiao Xian didn't argue. He kept the bag of bug skin and tied it properly. Mu Yao had brought the royal city people here to search for the bug blood that the Gongjia ancestors had mentioned. It was a pity that before Mu Yao could find it, they were attacked by a group of giant mountain eagles. They didn't know how Mu Yao was doing, but perhaps they could find out more from the Yi family. The team that came all the way here to search for bug blood had suffered great losses. They were nowhere to be found, and Xiao Xian had found them. According to Xiao Xian's plan, he wanted to bring Yi Zong and Yi Qi back to the tribe. He wanted to get more information from the Yi family. Perhaps they could tell him more about the use of bug blood. Unfortunately, one of them might not be able to hold on until then. Yi Qi's injuries were worse than Yi Zong's. Although the slaves had tried their best to save him, there was little effect. Yi Qi also had no intention of living. Not only that, he wanted to die here. Because if he lived, Xiao Xian would bring him to the Yanjiao tribe. Yi Qi didn't want to suffer such humiliation. Yi Qi hated Xiao Xian deeply. To him, Xiao Xian was just like Yi Xiang, a great threat to the Yi family. Even though they managed to escape from the broken boundary because of Xiao Xian, the scene of Xiao Xian smashing the giant tortoise into the boundary made Yi Qi choke. The sight of Xiao Xian made him want to vomit blood. When Xiao Xian arrived, Yi Qi was lying on the ground. Yi Zong was kneeling beside Yi Qi. 8 slaves stood guard around them. When he saw Xiao Xian, Yi Qi spat out another mouthful of blood. He glared at Xiao Xian and opened his mouth, but he still turned to look at Yi Zong. He raised his hand and grabbed Yi Zong's arm. His fingers were so tight that it looked like he wanted to break Yi Zong's arm. He stared at Yi Zong and said with all his strength, "You must do what you promised me. You must." Yi Zong nodded silently. Seeing this, Yi Qi roared towards the sky, using the last bit of strength he had left to vent the unwillingness in his heart. He was someone of high status in the Yi family and a respected master in the royal city. Who knew that he would end up like this? Yi Xiang's appearance was a huge blow to Yi Qi. He could still remember the helplessness and despair he felt when he faced Yi Xiang. Even though he was only one of 100 people in the formation and did not stand guard at the front like Yi Tuan and the rest, he still felt it strongly. Yi Qi knew very well what happened to the Yi family at the headquarters. That was why he could not accept it. He was even a little scared. He was worried that the Yi family's glory would end here, just like the tribes that disappeared with time. Yi Xiang aside, even this Yanjiao kid had dealt them such a huge blow. They even managed to escape from Yi Xiang's boundary only because of Xiao Xian. That sliver of hope in the midst of despair was created by the tribesmen he had always looked down on. It would be strange if he was happy. If Xiao Xian knew what Yi Qi was thinking, he would have scoffed. The Yi family was used to being arrogant, thinking that everyone was inferior to them. Xiao Xian ignored Yi Qi's resentment that Xiao Xian broke the Yi family's ancestral oracle and used the giant tortoise to break the boundary. Nonsense. If he did not borrow the tortoise shell, was he supposed to break the boundary with his bare hands? How painful would that be? How tiring would that be? It was already tiring enough to support the fire giant. Of course he had to choose the most efficient way to get out of this predicament. What were the first 2 skills that had been passed down from their ancestors to the present day that were recognized by the tribesmen? One was fire, and the other was a tool. Only idiots would not use the tools they had. Thankfully, Xiao Xian did not know what Yi Qi was thinking and did not say it out loud. If Yi Qi heard Xiao Xian's reply, he would have spat out more blood before he died. Yi Qi breathed his last. The Yi family had a tradition of choosing their own graves and did not insist on being buried at the Yi family headquarters. Moreover, the royal city was not the ancestral land of the Yi family. In terms of feelings, the Yi family did not have as much attachment to the royal city as the Ji family. After all, the Ji family had many farms and valleys. The Yi family only needed to bring their own divination tools and did not have a strong sense of belonging to the royal city. When Yi Qi felt that he could not hold on for much longer, he had already negotiated with Yi Zong. 2 of his 4 slaves would be buried with him while the other 2 would follow Yi Zong. Yi Zong found a place near the mountains to bury Yi Qi. Yi Zong did not need to do anything for the other 2 slaves buried with him. After digging the graves, they would end their own lives. The slaves brought here by Yi Zong and Yi Qi were all well trained. The mark of a slave was deeply imprinted in their minds. They would never betray their masters. Even if they had other ideas, they would carry them out. Xiao Xian did not interfere with the burial of Yi Qi. Yi Zong had talked to him about the terms. What surprised Xiao Xian was that Yi Qi would rather die than be captured by Xiao Xian and brought back to the Yanjiao tribe. Before his death, Yi Qi even made Yi Zong promise him that he would never let the Yanjiao bring his body back to the Yanjiao tribe. On the contrary, Yi Zong did not reject being taken back to the Yanjiao tribe as a captive at all. Xiao Xian was not sure whether this idea was true or not, but it was at least 70 to 80% credible. Yi Zong might have really been willing to be captured, but he did not say what other ideas he had behind this. However, he did promise Xiao Xian that he would not do anything harmful to the Yanjiao tribe. He swore on the totem of the Yi family. Regardless of whether it was true or not, after Yi Zong buried Yi Qi, Xiao Xian took Yi Zong and his 6 slaves away from the mountains and returned to the Yanjiao tribe. 20 worm skins, a large bundle of worm silk, and 2 small bags of mysterious ice water left behind by the star butterfly during its metamorphosis were also taken away. Chapter 806. Because he had to bring Yi Zong and 6 slaves, Xiao Xian's return was much slower. Fortunately, Yi Zong's 4 slaves and the 2 left behind by Yi Qi made the 6 slaves strong enough to not drag them down. Moreover, Yi Zong would occasionally perform divination to confirm which direction was the safest. Even if Yi Zong could not hold on, Xiao Xian could use a straw rope to perform divination to avoid unnecessary trouble. Xiao Xian did not fly on the eagle's back. He kept an eye on Yi Zong and obtained more information from Yi Zong on the way back. According to Yi Zong, the mysterious ice-like liquid they had collected was probably what the people of Royal City were looking for. According to the Gongjia family's ancestors' notes, the star butterfly's blood could be used to forge top-grade treasured swords. As for how it could be forged, Gongjiayu, who had come with them but had died under the eagle's claws, did not explain. Yi Zong really did not know. Xiao Xian also asked Yi Zong about the strange black world. Yi Zong was tight-lipped too, only telling Xiao Xian that it was a spiritual world that was connected to one's consciousness. If one was killed in that world, one would die even if there were no wounds on one's body. How could one live without a soul? From another perspective, it was equivalent to brain death. Yi Zong was very cooperative throughout the journey. Other than secrets that could not be revealed, he would answer as long as Xiao Xian asked. He even told Xiao Xian some secrets about the other tribes in Royal City. This surprised Xiao Xian. Based on Yi Zong's behavior, he felt like he was going to join Yanjiao and was trying to please them. This was Yi Zong, the prodigy of the Yi family's younger generation. As for Gan Xie, after drinking the worm's blood, his body had undergone a qualitative change. Xiao Xian had seen Gan Xie split a rock like it was tofu. His elongated finger bones were as sharp as knives. Yang Guang's fingers glowed with a metallic sheen. On the way back, he drank a little more worm's blood. It was just a tiny amount and he stopped drinking it. In Gan Xie's words, only the first mouthful of the worm's blood was fresh. That was the only taste that excited him. After that, he lost interest in it. In fact, Gan Qian knew that drinking the fresh worm's blood next year might not help him. It had already brought about a qualitative change in him. No matter how much he drank in the future, there would be a limit to what he could change. However, it was still okay to drink a little of the insect's blood every year. After all, it was good for his body. A small change was still a change. Star butterflies should appear every year, right? Gan Xie thought that he might wait for this period of time to go to Eagle Mountain to look for the blood. However, when he thought about the environment there, he felt that it would be difficult. If you go there alone, you must be careful. Don't attack the giant mountain eagles. Xiao Xian reminded Gan Xie after understanding his thoughts. Gan Xie nodded. Of course, he knew that the giant mountain eagles were the ones guarding the area. The ancestors of the giant mountain eagles were probably the ones guarding the area. He could still remember the enormous pressure they gave off. If he couldn't go there alone, he would have to wait for Yanjiao's people. Once it was proven that the worm's blood was extremely helpful for forging, Yanjiao would definitely send people there in the future. When Xiao Xian returned to Yanjiao, he saw the Yanjiao hunting team at the hunting area. They stayed in the forest for a while before returning with the team. On the way back, Xiao Xian saw some people from smaller tribes. Judging from their hunting habits, they were clearly used to it. They weren't as timid and unfamiliar as they were when they first entered the forest. During the time that Xiao Xian was away, these people from smaller tribes had gradually integrated into the Flaming River Alliance. They had tasted the benefits and were motivated. Many tribes that used to starve no longer had to worry about food and clothing. They could even satisfy their little ambitions. Of course, the Yanjiao people were the happiest about Xiao Xian's return. During the time that Xiao Xian disappeared, the Yanjiao tribes were filled with worry. The people from smaller tribes who went into the forest with him knew that Xiao Xian had left, but they didn't know where he went. The Yanjiao people were tight-lipped, so they had no way of knowing. That was why there were all kinds of guesses in private. There were also people who were gloating over other people's misfortune. Some people even said that the Yanjiao Grand Elder might have been eaten by a wild beast in the forest. In the end, the Yanjiao warriors heard those words and beat them up. They even said that if they heard such words a second time, they would kill them on the spot. Yanjiao was now the leader of the Flaming River Alliance. If the smaller tribes wanted to survive in this alliance, they had to rely on Yanjiao. That was why, after being warned, the rumors about Yanjiao quickly disappeared. Even if they said it in private, they were very careful. They wouldn't let the Yanjiao people hear them. Even though there were no more suspicions, many people in Yanjiao were still anxious. From the chief to the warriors, they were all restless. The leaders' tempers were getting hotter and hotter. One wrong move and they would explode. They were still suppressing their anger because Guizhe said that Xiao Xian was still alive. As a shaman, Guizhe could roughly sense Xiao Xian's location. He wasn't in danger. When they heard that Xiao Xian was back, the gloomy atmosphere in the Yanjiao tribe changed. It was as if they had reaped a great harvest. From the top of the mountain to the streets of the trading point, the atmosphere suddenly lightened up. A traveling team that had just arrived at the Flaming River trading point was walking around the trading point. When they saw the guards patrolling the streets, they were behaving strangely today. Their usual cold faces looked as if someone owed them 1,000 animal skins, but today, they were all grinning from ear to ear. What's the good news in Yanjiao? Someone in the team asked the people from the other teams in a low voice. I heard that Yanjiao's Grand Elder is back. The person who answered let out a long sigh of relief. Before this, they didn't dare to mention Yanjiao's Grand Elder in the trading point. They were afraid that the Yanjiao people would beat them up if they said something wrong. In the worst case, they might even draw their swords. When Ao, who was overseeing the construction site, heard the news, he quickly stopped what he was doing and rushed back to the headquarters. When he saw the eagle in the sky, he was relieved. When he saw that Xiao Xian was unharmed, he finally relaxed. Although Guizhe had already gone out to search, Ao still brought some people to search in the direction that Guizhe had pointed out. However, they received news that something had happened at the trading point, so they rushed back to deal with it. "You're back. It's good that you're back. Ha ha ha, you're finally back. If you didn't come back soon, I would have thought that something had happened to you." Duo Kong strode over and gave Xiao Xian a bear hug. Then, he patted Xiao Xian's shoulder with all his might. Before this, he wouldn't have said this. When Duo Kong heard that something had happened to Xiao Xian, he would also act like the other Yanjiao people and beat the person who said this. However, now that Xiao Xian had returned safely, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. On the mountain, Gigu and Guizhe, as well as the two retired shamans, went down the mountain to welcome them. They were happy that Xiao Xian had returned safely. The tribe was where it was today because of Xiao Xian. However, after the initial excitement, they noticed that out of the 7 people that Xiao Xian had brought back, the other 6 were obviously slaves. The one in the middle was probably the target. "Is he the Yi family member you mentioned?" Gigu asked Xiao Xian. "Yes, Yi Zong from the Yi family," Xiao Xian said. "Yi Zong from the Yi family?" Zheng Luo, who had just arrived, glanced at them sharply. The 6 slaves guarding Yi Zong immediately tensed up. The Yanjiao people around them were too hostile, and many of them were strong. If a fight really broke out, the 6 of them wouldn't be able to protect Yi Zong. "Is there a problem with Yi Zong from the Yi family?" "No, Yi Zong from the Yi family. The Yi family member from the royal city team that hunted us back then." Duo Kang's smile immediately faded when he heard that Xiao Xian had returned. He stared at Yi Zong with a murderous glare that wasn't much weaker than Zheng Luo's. Duo Kang gritted his teeth when he thought about how they were hunted down when they migrated. If Xiao Xian hadn't brought them across the sea, it was hard to say how many of them would have survived. It was even possible that all of them would have been wiped out. When they migrated from the other side of the sea, they were hunted down by the royal city team and other organizations. Although Yi Zong wasn't the one who gave the orders, he was an accomplice and an enemy if he participated. They didn't believe that Yi Zong didn't want to kill them back then. When he followed the team to hunt them down, did he think that this day would come? Duo Kong flexed his fingers, thinking about how to deal with this captive. But after some thought, he felt that something wasn't right. If Xiao Xian had brought him back alive, it definitely wasn't to kill him. Sure enough, Gigu only ordered people to bring Yi Zong to a cave and lock him up with the slaves. He didn't immediately give the order to execute him. When they reached the top of the mountain, everyone else had left. Only a few of the most important people in the Yanjiao tribe were left in the stone house. "Xian, tell us what you think," Gigu said. There was no one else here, only the elders, the chief, the shaman, and the team leader. Xiao Xian told them about the incident. Xiao Xian didn't mention the mysterious power in his body. He emphasized that he had borrowed the power of his ancestors. This also explained why he had brought Yi Zong back alive. Only Yi Zong was left in the royal city team. Xiao Xian wanted to know more from Yi Zong. One was about the dark world of the Yi family. Xiao Xian wanted to know more, but unfortunately, Yi Zong didn't say much. The second was about the bug blood. Did the bug blood have other secrets? Like casting? What? That bug blood can really make better weapons. Hearing Xiao Xian's explanation, Duo Kong couldn't sit still. It's just a guess. We still need to test it. Xiao Xian took out 2 bug skin bags. Test it. Test it. Test it today. Not only Duo Kong, but the others were also excited. The green-faced fanged beast's blood had already given them the advantage of making better weapons. If it could make better weapons, of course they were excited. Wait, Xian, you haven't finished yet. What's the third one? Guizhe asked. Everyone was already excited by the bug blood. Hearing this, they suppressed their excitement and anticipation and looked at Xiao Xian, waiting for him to finish. The third one is also the one that has the most to do with Yanjiao. Xiao Xian paused and said, "The reason why I brought Yizong back safely was because of the condition Yizong gave me." He said that he was willing to sacrifice the rest of his life to help Yanjiao expand. Our expansion of the trading point has nothing to do with Yizong. How can he help us? With those arms of his, could he lift stone or wood? Or will he let the slaves do the work? Duo Kong was dissatisfied. No, he can. Guizhe and the two retired witches leaned forward. They understood Xiao Xian's words. Others might not understand, but as witches, they were very sensitive to certain things. What do you mean? Everyone in the room looked at Guizhe and the other two witches. Rumor has it that the Yi family can observe everything in the world. They can see the past and the future. Guizhe said. Gigu frowned, then his eyes widened. You mean, he can point out the best places to build and what to avoid? That's right. The Yanjiao tribesmen had been frightened by all kinds of natural disasters. Back then, the Yanjiao tribe had to leave their homeland because of natural disasters and split up. Forget about Jingluo's branch, the Flaming River branch had lived in isolation from the rest of the world for almost 1,000 years. All their skills had almost been lost and they had regressed to the lowest level. Even if they found a way to cross the river and return to the old haunt with great difficulty, they even welcomed the return of Zheng Luo's group and gathered the wanderers. But just as they were preparing to rise in the old haunt, another disaster struck. If they hadn't been prepared in advance, they might not have done better than their ancestors 1,000 years ago. If they could have known about the natural disasters beforehand, that would have been great. It had only been a few years but they had already gone through several large-scale migrations. It was too much. The tribesmen respected and feared the heavens. Can the Yi family be trusted? Duo Kong was still doubtful. As the saying went, those who were not of the same tribe had different intentions. How could he trust someone who wasn't from their tribe? Not to mention someone from the Yi family. The Yi family can be trusted, Zheng Luo said. Since he swore on the Yi family totem, then Yizong should be a man of his word. If that's the case, then we can spare his life. Duo Kong didn't insist on taking Yizong's life. Their tribe was the most important thing. But the problem is, he doesn't want his own life, Xiao Xian said. What? Xiao Xian's words confused everyone in the room. If Yizong wasn't doing it for himself, who else could it be? He wants to trade a life for a life. As for whose life, he didn't mention it. He only said that he wanted to talk to us after our discussion. Xiao Xian repeated Yizong's words. Trade a life for a life. Who did he want to save? The Yanjiao people discussed at the top of the mountain for a long time before leaving. After Xiao Xian went down the mountain, he went to the trading point to check on the progress of the expansion. Because of Xiao Xian's disappearance, the expansion wasn't progressing very quickly. Hey! Xiao Xian! As soon as Xiao Xian went over, he was stopped by EC. EC had been waiting here. He couldn't go to the Yanjiao headquarters, so he waited here. I heard you brought back a few captives. Who did you catch? Chapter 807. When Xiao Xian brought Yizong and the others back to the tribe, they met the hunting party. Many people knew that Xiao Xian had brought back captives. It was not hard for EC to know this. However, EC usually did not stick his nose into other people's business. Now that he had come to look for Xiao Xian, he must have guessed something. Xiao Xian did not hide it. It's Yizong from your Yi family. Yizong. Him. EC did not look too surprised. He was more confused. He had already guessed the other party's identity from the descriptions of the hunting party. However, he was still puzzled when he heard Xiao Xian confirm it. It was possible that he was a peripheral member of the Yi family. However, based on Yi Si's understanding of Yi Zong, based on his understanding of the Yi family, most people from the main branch would rather die than become captives, especially from these tribesmen. This was what puzzled him. Who was Yi Zong? He was the most outstanding person in their generation. Yi Si had heard people say that if anyone in their generation could reach Yi Zong's level in the future, it would definitely be Yi Zong. To Yi Si, who was also from the main branch but was a loser, Yi Zong was what the elders called someone else's child. Because he knew how outstanding Yi Zong was, Yi Si was still puzzled by Xiao Xian's confirmation. Can I meet Yi Zong? Yi Si asked. Seeing Xiao Xian look over, Yi Si hurriedly said, I promise, I will never do anything to harm Yanjiao. After all, I've already left the Yi family. Xiao Xian looked at Yi Si in silence for a moment, then nodded. All right. Xiao Xian was not in a hurry to check out the construction site anyway. He turned around and led Yi Si over. Grasshopper, the half-beast human slave beside Yi Si, also followed. Yi Si looked at Grasshopper, then at Xiao Xian. Can I bring him along? Yes, Xiao Xian said. The Flaming Horn tribe's territory was very big. After they moved here from the old haunt, they expanded their territory. There were many small hills in the territory. Some of the hills were inhabited by wanderers, some were used for training or stone mining, and some were used to imprison people. Yi Zong and his 6 slaves were locked up in a cave on a small mountain. The prison door in the cave was made of bronze. Unless they could break through the cave, it would be very difficult for them to escape. When Yi Zong saw Yi Si, his expression changed slightly. He was not surprised. Instead, he smiled. This made Yi Si even more puzzled. Take your time, Xiao Xian led Yi Si in, then closed the door and left the cave. After Xiao Xian left, Yi Si looked at Yi Zong's situation. Yi Zong and his 6 slaves were not in the same cell. The other 6 slaves were in different cells. Therefore, there were only Yi Si, Yi Zong, and Yi Si in the same cell. You're here. Yi Zong's tone was calm. He looked at Yi Si and then at Qing Fu. When Yi Zong's gaze swept over him, Qing Fu was so nervous that the thorns on his back almost popped out. His servile nature was engraved in his bones. He could not even straighten his back in front of the Yi family. He was especially nervous. Not to mention Yi Zong, who had a high status in the Yi family. It was said that the life of a slave was directly related to the slave master. When he was in the Yi family, the slaves who followed the outstanding descendants had a much better life. At least, they did not have to worry about starvation. On the other hand, the slaves who followed the marginalized people did not have a good life. When they were in trouble, they would even be sold in exchange for money. Qing Fu followed Yi Si. Although he did not have a good life in the Yi family, Yi Si knew how to run a business, so he did not starve to death. Even so, Grasshopper was much thinner than the other half-beast slaves. But now, Yi Zong compared Qing Fu's appearance to the one in front of him. His gaze was like a searchlight. When Qing Fu began to tremble, Yi Zong said faintly, "You've become much stronger." Although he did not want to admit it, the reality in front of him told Yi Zong that Yi Si and his servant's life in Yanjiao was much better than when they were in the Yi family. Even the 2 half-orc slaves he had brought with him were far inferior to Qing Fu. When Qing Fu came in with Yi Si, the other slaves locked in the other cells were surprised. This kid had actually gained weight after betraying the Yi family with Yi Si. In response, Yi Si smiled faintly. Life is good. It was ironic that a member of the Yi family had a better life in a foreign tribe than in his own tribe. Ignoring Yi Zong's rueful expression, Yi Si asked, "Why are you here?" The Gongjia family was looking for star butterfly worm blood to make weapons. Unfortunately, in the end, Yanjiao's Xiao Xian got his hands on it. Yizong explained the purpose of their trip. You've already fought Yi Xiang. Although Yi Si was curious about the star butterfly worm blood, he was more interested in Yizong's mention of the Yi family's fight with Yi Xiang. Looking at Yizong's fate and the dead Yi Qi, it was not hard to guess the outcome of this battle. I'm afraid the Yi family will not be peaceful for a long time, said Yi Si. Indeed. This time, if it wasn't for Yanjiao's Xiao Xian, none of the 100 of us would have made it out alive. What? What does this have to do with Xiao Xian? Yi Si was surprised. The Yi family had mobilized 100 people to fight Yi Xiang on a battlefield like that. Yi Si could not perform divination, nor could he enter that realm. However, he knew that logically speaking, outsiders should not be able to interfere in the Yi family's battles. And yet, Yizong said that Xiao Xian had indirectly saved them. That was unbelievable. How? How is that possible? Yi Si could predict many things, but what Yizong said was completely unexpected. He did not even think about it. Why not? Even the oracle left behind by our ancestors cracked. Yizong recounted how Xiao Xian broke the boundary. The oracle left behind by our ancestors. Yi Si's mouth fell open, his expression saying, "Are you fucking kidding me?" Yi Si knew how powerful the tortoise shell was. Yet, such a powerful tortoise shell had been shattered by brute force. Yi Xiang and Yanjiao's Xiao Xian were both beyond his imagination. He knew that Xiao Xian was powerful, but he had never placed Xiao Xian on the same level as Yi Xiang. Yizong leaned against the wall, his expression sorrowful and melancholic. Yi Si even saw a hint of relief in Yizong's eyes. Yi Si was observant and very observant. That was why he could tell that Yizong's expression was not right. This made him even more confused. After a moment of silence, Yizong finally said, "The founder shaman seal." His voice was not loud, as if he was mumbling to himself. However, in this cave, the other slaves did not dare to breathe loudly. The surroundings were silent. Even Yi Si, with his poor hearing, could hear Yizong's words clearly. These words caused Yi Si's face to turn pale and his heart to tremble in shock. The founder shaman seal. It's really the founder shaman seal. Are you sure? Yi Si felt as if there was a knife stuck in his throat. It was difficult for him to make a sound, and every word was trembling. Those who could be called ancestors could be traced back to a long, long time ago, when the human tribes were just formed. There was a group of people who were called ancestors. They were the ones who controlled the power of the fire seed. They were the ones who built the human tribes. It was also from them that humans began to break away from the bottom of the food chain. They multiplied and gradually developed to where they were today. There were countless versions of the legend of the ancestors. Every tribe claimed that they were the descendants of the ancestors. Otherwise, without the ancestors, where did the tribe's fire seed come from? However, in the Yi family's records, the real ancestors were not the first people who built the tribe, but the first people who controlled the fire seed. Many tribesmen believed that the people who built the tribe were the first to control the power of the fire seed. However, according to the Yi family's records, this was not the case. The ancestors came before them. The ancestors taught more people how to control the fire seed. Those who were taught later used the power of the fire seed to build the tribe. The ancestors might not even belong to any tribe. If the tribes were compared to the branches and leaves on a tree, then the ancestors would be the trunk, the only main trunk. The other branches would grow from the main trunk. In the Yi family's records, there was limited information that could be passed down. This was because the Yi family had many special ways of passing down information and preserved more of the history. In the limited records that were passed down, there was no mention of what the ancestors looked like, how many of them there were, or how they discovered and controlled the power of the fire seed. Among the preserved images, the most obvious one was the cross-shaped work pattern, which was also known by the Yi family as the ancestor witch seal. Legend had it that the appearance of the ancestor witch seal was accompanied by the appearance of witches. Therefore, the ancestor witch seal was a representation of the ancestor witch. Everyone who knew about the ancestor witch seal was in awe of that pattern. This was also why even Yi Xiang could not remain calm when he saw the ancestor witch seal appear where Xiao Xian was. Just as Yi Si's heart was in turmoil, Yi Zong asked again, "Do you think the ancestor witch is still alive?" This alive did not necessarily mean alive in the eyes of the Yi family. Even if the body did not exist, it was not completely dead. The Yi family acknowledged the existence of souls. According to the ancestors of the Yi family, it was difficult to live without souls. Birds, beasts, mountains, rocks, water, wood, as well as souls. Everything had a soul, but some were so strong that even ordinary people could not ignore them, such as fire crystals. Some were so weak that even people with sharp senses could not detect them. The bone-reading beasts were created by the Yi family using the power of souls. Yi Si understood what Yi Zong was referring to. The ancestor witch was too mysterious, and because it had been too long, no one knew the truth. Then, even if the ancestor witch's body was destroyed, would her soul still exist? Yi Si could not answer. That was beyond his ability to predict. After a moment of hesitation, Yi Si asked, "Didn't you have a good talk with Xiao Xian?" Good talk. Yi Zong smiled bitterly. If he had known, he would not have been in such dire straits. When he thought about how he had followed the royal city's army to hunt down the Yanjiao tribe, Yi Zong felt like he had lost decades of his lifespan. Then, he thought about how Yi Tuan had wanted to use Xiao Xian as bait to sacrifice Xiao Xian so that they could escape. In the end, Xiao Xian had smashed their oracle. Although the outcome had been beneficial to both sides, Yi Zong felt helpless every time he thought about it. The enmity had existed for a long time, so if he wanted to resolve it and make the Yanjiao agree to spare his life, he would have to sacrifice more. Without waiting for Yi Zong's reply, Yi Si asked again, "Is this why you were willing to come here as a captive?" Yi Zong smiled but did not speak. However, Yi Si had already guessed Yi Zong's choice from his expression. If Xiao Xian had been an ordinary tribesman, Yi Zong would have done the same. He would have dug a hole and buried himself. He would rather die than become a captive. At this moment, Yi Zong suddenly looked in a direction, his eyes flashing. "The people I've been waiting for have arrived." Chapter 808. In the forest outside the trading point, a group of people was waiting on a path that had been opened up in the forest. An eagle flew past in the sky. The traveling teams looked at the Yanjiao people curiously. They didn't know why these Yanjiao people were here, but looking at the eagle in the sky, those who were familiar with the trading point knew that the Yanjiao people must be here for something important. Otherwise, this eagle wouldn't have appeared here. The traveling teams were curious, but they didn't want to be implicated. If something really happened and a fight broke out, they wouldn't even have time to cry if they were accidentally injured. Therefore, some of the teams only glanced in that direction a few times before taking a detour. Xiao Xian sat on the back of the eagle and looked in a direction in the distance. He'd heard the conversation between Yi Si and Yi Zong in the cave that day. There hadn't been anyone else at the cave entrance at that time, so he'd moved the people who had been guarding the cave entrance away. Xiao Xian was very curious about the founder shaman seal that Yi Zong had mentioned, because it hadn't been recorded in the Yanjiao ancestors' notes. Of course, it could also be that the Yanjiao tribe had been through multiple migrations, and the tools used to pass it down were limited, so it couldn't be passed down to this day. Xiao Xian's ability to come to this world clearly had something to do with the founder shaman seal. However, Xiao Xian still couldn't figure out why the founder shaman seal had appeared on him. Perhaps it was because of that stone, or perhaps it was because of something else. And now, he'd brought a team of Yanjiao warriors here to wait for the person that Yi Zong had been waiting for all this time. After Yi Zong had spoken to Yi Si that day, he told Xiao Xian that the person he'd been waiting for was coming. Yizong hadn't been willing to say much all this time because he'd been waiting for this day. Xiao Xian looked ahead and focused his gaze. He raised his hand and patted Cha-Cha, indicating for it to fly over. A little further away from the trading point, a tall figure was shuttling through the forest. Because his body was much larger than a normal person's, the gaps between the trees and the forest were not enough for him to walk through. Therefore, even though he tried his best to walk through the open space, he still couldn't avoid bumping into branches or tree trunks. However, that person didn't care. He directly broke the tree in front of him and raised his large hand to push aside some vines and branches. His entire person looked very clumsy, but his movements didn't seem to be slow. His footsteps were very hurried. Some of the small beasts in the surroundings had already fled upon hearing the sound. In the forest, there were many bloodstains on that person's greenish-gray skin. There were many wounds from sharp and blunt weapons. That person raised his hand to wipe the sweat and blood off his face. His beast-like eyes stared straight ahead as he ran quickly. While running, that person would also intentionally use his hands to block the branches that were pushed away and bounced back to prevent those branches from hitting behind him. Suddenly, the green-gray figure paused, and the killing intent in his eyes soared. He raised his head and stared at the sky, one hand shielding his back. Whoosh, a giant eagle flew across the sky and circled above the forest. Then, a figure jumped down from above and landed on the grass not far from that person with a bang. The ground instantly caved in, forming a pit with a diameter of more than a meter. Bits of grass flew everywhere. Xiao Xian looked at the person not far away. The other party was a half-beastman about the same size as Grasshopper. Probably because of the long journey, his body was thinner than Grasshopper's. His gloomy eyes stared vigilantly at Xiao Xian. The muscles all over his body were as tense as stone. Some of the wounds were so deep that bones could be seen. However, the other party didn't seem to feel it, and his movements weren't hindered. Xiao Xian took a step forward. Crack, 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 many bone spurs protruded from the other party's back, trembling as they made sounds. This was a warning and also a threat. His originally ferocious appearance became even more ferocious. The other party turned sideways, one hand with sharp claws in front of his body in a defensive posture, and the other hand behind his back. Grasshopper. Xiao Xian looked at the half-beastman slave not far away and called out. Grasshopper stared at Xiao Xian with his beast-like eyes, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. Although the other party didn't admit it, judging from the other party's reaction, it should be him. Xiao Xian moved his eyes away from Grasshopper and looked at a place 10 steps away. There was a slightly bigger tree there. It couldn't be compared with the towering ancient trees in the hunting ground, but it was still as thick as a person. Grasshopper. There was no response from the other side. Xiao Xian wasn't in a hurry, and waited quietly. After a few breaths, a short and thin figure walked out from behind the tree. There were many stripes on his bare skin, like the camouflage of a beast. It was suitable for sneak attacks in the forest. The short and thin figure walked quickly to Grasshopper's side like a shadow. The running sound wasn't loud, like the flapping of an insect's wings. "Who are you?" Grasshopper asked. Xiao Xian didn't answer directly, but raised his hand and threw a jade stone over there. It was the jade stone used by Yizong for divination. It was also the certificate given by Yizong before Xiao Xian came to pick him up. The short and thin Grasshopper caught the jade stone and looked at it carefully. His vigilant face relaxed a little, and a little joy appeared on his face. Grasshopper, who was standing next to Grasshopper, didn't hide his excitement. Master's divination stone. Xiao Xian looked around again. Just the two of you. Where are the other 8 people? He could recognize the 2 slaves according to Yizong's description, but Yizong said that he had sent 10 slaves to escort, and now he only saw Grasshopper and Grasshopper. No. The joy on Grasshopper's face faded. Of the 10 slaves, only the 2 of them were left alive. If they had waited a little longer, Grasshopper might not have survived. They had encountered too many dangers along the way. They didn't have the ability to predict good or bad luck like the E family, so it was naturally much more difficult. Even EC, who didn't know divination, could make judgments based on the environment. Therefore, although EC and Grasshopper were only master and servant, it was much easier for them than for Grasshopper and Grasshopper. Grasshopper and Grasshopper were complete strangers to this continent. They didn't understand the language, so it was even more difficult for them. "Where's your little master?" Xiao Xian looked at Grasshopper and asked. Grasshopper looked at Xiao Xian and then at Grasshopper, but didn't move. He wasn't very smart. It was Grasshopper who made decisions between them. If they encountered an irresistible danger, Grasshopper and not Grasshopper would be the one to stay behind as a meat shield. If Grasshopper was alive, he could take the little master further away. But if Grasshopper was alive, he would probably be killed soon. This was also the reason why Grasshopper had more injuries. Greetings to the little master. Grasshopper didn't let down his guard against Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian didn't care. He could feel a life force behind Grasshopper. As long as he was sure the little master was alive, it was fine. Follow me. Xiao Xian turned and walked back to the tribe. Grasshopper looked at Grasshopper. Grasshopper followed him, so he also followed. On Grasshopper's back, there was something woven from vines. It looked like a shell. Inside the shell, there was a basket with a baby in it. It was Yizong's half-year-old son. It wasn't easy to bring a half-year-old baby from the royal city to here. Xiao Xian brought Grasshopper and Grasshopper to the cave where Yizong was locked up. For several days, Yizong had been doing divination. No one knew what he saw, but they saw more and more white hair on Yizong's temples. Yizong's eyes were red, and his hands trembled as he took his son. There were some secret recipes that were specially made for long journeys. They could be fed to babies, and they could also let them sleep after eating without affecting the journey. Therefore, when they arrived in front of Yizong, the baby, who was protected by the slaves, was still sleeping peacefully. When Yizong left the Yi family, his son hadn't been born yet. However, before he left, he did a divination once. After discussing it with his wife, he made a few plans. If something happened to the Yi family, he would send the child away. The other members of the Yi family didn't know that Yizong, who had reached a bottleneck in his divination, actually did a divination before leaving the Yi family. Moreover, it was a very successful divination. Everyone else thought that Yizong left to train to break through his bottleneck, but only his trusted aides knew that Yizong had other plans. Now, his baby son had been secretly sent away. As for the Yi family, Yizong's newborn son had disappeared during the Yi family's turmoil. However, Yizong hadn't decided where to send the child at the time. He only made the decision after the battle with Yi Xiang. He had been looking for the safest place to send his newborn son away from the Yi family's turmoil. After all, it was very difficult for such a young child to survive in the chaos of the Yi family. However, Yizong didn't expect that in the end, the safest place would be here. At first, Grasshopper and Grasshopper didn't know where to send their young master. They could only follow their master's instructions in their minds until they met Xiao Xian. This was also why Yizong had negotiated with Yanjiao to trade a life for a life. Yizong was the only one who had participated in the hunt back then. The child was innocent, but to many people, no matter who it was innocent. They had always insisted on eliminating the root of the problem. In order to make Yanjiao accept his son, Yizong had decided to use up his lifespan and almost all of his life's energy in advance to plan for Yanjiao's expansion. This was the greatest sincerity he could show to Yanjiao. This condition was hard for the higher-ups of the Yanjiao tribe to reject. Yanjiao's elders, chiefs, and shamans had all agreed to Yizong's conditions. As long as he didn't do anything that would harm Yanjiao's interests, they would allow Yizong's son to live on Yanjiao's territory. Yizong handed his son to Yi Si, who was standing next to him. Please. In Yanjiao's territory, the only person Yizong truly trusted was Yi Si. Even though Yi Si had left the Yi family, Yi Si was still a member of the Yi family, a member of the main branch of the Yi family. Yi Si reluctantly took over this burden. He felt that his life in the future would not be as carefree as it used to be. As a stay-at-home dad, he had to take care of the lives of 8 slaves. Didn't you say you haven't named him yet? Have you thought of a name yet? Yi Si asked. Yizong's eyes flashed like a firefly in the dark night. He said word by word, Su, my son's name is Su. Yi Si's eyelids twitched. He stared at Yizong. In the Yi family's dictionary, Su was a staff. What did Yizong mean by this name? Who was the one who wanted the staff, and who was the one who held it? Yi Si felt that Yizong was playing a very big game of chess. This game of chess was not targeted at Yanjiao, but at the Yi family. What exactly had Yizong seen in his divination over the past few days? Yi Si could not get an answer from Yizong. After arranging Yi Su and the 8 slaves, Yizong began to fulfill his promise to Yanjiao. Yizong knew that the more benefits he brought to Yanjiao, the better Yi Su's life in Yanjiao would be. Just like Yi Si, he would become an ordinary person living in Yanjiao's territory. Yizong did not understand why he trusted Yanjiao's promises so much. Perhaps it was Xiao Xian's ancestor shaman seal that eliminated all his worries. Rumor had it that the Yi family's ancestor was the first person to be taught how to control a fire seed by the ancestor. The Yi family's fire seed was the second fire seed in the world to be controlled by a human being. That was why the Yi family's fire seed had the same white color as the ancestor's fire seed. For the next 10 days, Yizong did not stop. Yizong told Yanjiao where to dig wells, where to build tall buildings, and where to dig cellars. He even told Yanjiao about the severe natural disasters that might occur at some point in the future. He did not sleep or rest for 10 days and nights. Even Yanjiao's people advised him to rest. Unfortunately, Yizong did not stop. He was like a torch that emitted its last light, trying his best to finish what he wanted to do before the flame burned out. However, there was a limit to one's strength. After 10 days, Yizong had turned from a high-spirited young man into an old man with 1 foot in the grave. His hair was white, and his face was like tree bark. You will fulfill your promise, right? Yizong asked the Yanjiao's people as he sat in a wooden house on the mountain that Yanjiao's people had arranged for him. We will. Gigu did not say much and only answered seriously. He did not like Yizong, but he had to admit that he admired Yizong. Yizong looked at Xiao Xian. When he saw Xiao Xian nod, he finally relaxed. Yizong did not have much time left. He wanted to talk to Yi Si in his last moments. After the Yanjiao's people left the wooden house, Yizong said, I think I understand why Yi Xiang is doing this. Yi Si looked at Yizong in surprise. He did not understand why Yizong would think that. The Yi family has been sick for a long time. They are sick to the core, Yizong said slowly in his old voice. The Yi family was sick. They were no longer the Yi family at their peak. That was why Yi Xiang did not care, and even wanted to destroy them. It had nothing to do with the grudges that everyone thought they had. Since they were a bunch of trash, what harm was there in destroying them? That was probably what Yi Xiang was thinking. As for why Yi Xiang waited until now to act, perhaps he was waiting for an opportunity. Within the Yi family, the main branch and side branches were drifting apart. The difference in thinking was getting bigger. This time, with the main branch severely damaged, the side branches would not let go of this opportunity. They would enter a civil war that would be triggered by external forces. Before he left the Yi family, Yizong had divined that there would be a crisis. Even if Yi Zong was stuck at a bottleneck, he was still the most outstanding member of the Yi family in his generation. However, between returning to the Yi family to quell the civil war and helping Yi Su settle down, Yi Zong chose the latter. Ridiculous. Pathetic. Yi Zong did not expect that the safest place he found, the last escape route, would be the Yinjiao tribe that the Yi family had always looked down on. The Yi family, who had always been known for their good eyesight, was actually so blind. The Yi family did not know when it started, but they had been blinded by vanity. They had become blind. For petty profits, they had used the skills passed down by their ancestors to make cheap schemes. EC, who did not have the ability to perform divination, was actually the smartest person in the Yi family. He was the first to avoid the storm. When the storm formed, he had already left and found the safest place. Blind. How blind. When our ancestors divined the world, did they predict the Yi family's current situation? I know that there can be no construction without destruction. The Yi family needs a new beginning. The current Yi family was like an old house that had been in disrepair for a long time. It could not withstand the wind and rain and could collapse at any time. Instead of spending time repairing it bit by bit, it was better to tear it down and rebuild it. Yi Zong raised his withered fingers and held Yi Su's small, white hand. The Yi family's vision should not be limited to a mere royal city, nor should it stop at a piece of land. We should be like the once glorious ancestors of the Yi family. We should see the mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas, observe the life and death of plants, trees, water, and stones, and observe the emptiness of the world. The Yi family should see the world. The world. Yi Zong roared with all his might. This was his last venting before his death. Every word seemed to be filled with blood. EC's heart also ached when he heard this. How could he not know the current state of the Yi family? If he had not been so disappointed, why would he have left his tribe and come here to seek survival? 2 lines of tears flowed down Yi Zong's withered face. If he could wake more people up with this strategy, everything he had done would not have been in vain. His only regret was that he would not be able to see that day. Yi Zong looked at EC. If possible, I hope he can follow that person. That's very difficult. EC understood that Yi Zong wanted Yi Su to follow Xiao Xian. Just like in the Yi family's records, the Yi family's ancestors were the first to follow and control the fire seed. The person closest to the ancestors would always be the one who benefited the most. If the Yi family's ancestors had the ambition to rule, the throne of the royal city might not have been the Ji family's. I'll try my best. Yi Zong sounded disappointed. If Yi Su's talent is ordinary, how can he do what you want him to do? EC asked. He was not cursing. The Yi family's talent was very different. Even if the father was powerful, the son might not be. For example, EC's grandfather and his grandfather's grandfather were very powerful, but unfortunately, each generation was weaker than the last. EC's father was an ordinary person. When it came to EC, he did not even have the ability to perform divination. If not for his other skills, he would have starved to death long ago. Yi Zong was the genius of their generation, but Yi Su's talent might not be the same. Even if EC's divination skills were strong, he could not predict Yi Su's future. He can. Yi Zong's gaze was resolute. EC did not know why Yi Zong was so sure. Perhaps Yi Zong saw something in his divination, or perhaps it was Yi Zong's own obsession. EC could not see clearly and could not guess accurately. The more outstanding a member of the Yi family was, the more abilities they had, and the harder it was to predict. This was why outsiders thought that the Yi family was full of crazy people when they looked at the Yi family. Yi Zong did not say anything else. He pulled his bony fingers out of Yi Su's small white hands and staggered to the door of the wooden house. He rejected Jui and Grey Horse's help and leaned against the door frame to sit down. He looked at Xiao Xian standing not far away. He saw the figure behind Xiao Xian. It was the white figure that appeared with the founder shaman seal during the battle with Yi Xiang. Yi Zong smiled and closed his eyes. In the distance, the sun set and tired birds returned to their nests. Chapter 809. Yi Zong's funeral was handled by Yi Si, and Yanjiao didn't interfere. Yi Si chose to bury Yi Zong somewhere in the forest, not in Yanjiao's hunting area. There weren't many wild beasts living in that area. After Yi Zong left, he left behind 2 slaves, the 4 slaves who followed Yi Zong to Eagle Mountain, and Grey Horse and Bat, who brought Yi Su back. Altogether, there were 8 slaves. These 8 slaves were given to the next owner after the previous owner left, which was Yi Su, who had not yet weaned off milk. Before Yi Su could make his own decisions, Yi Si was in charge of him. As long as he didn't hurt Yi Su, the 8 slaves would be under Yi Si's management. With 8 more slaves and a child under his command, Yi Si's life became busier, but still relaxed. Among the 8 slaves, 6 of them were strong and healthy. Yi Si sent them to the construction site to participate in the expansion of Yanjiao's trading area. They worked as coolies, and not only did they get to eat, they could also bring more food back to lighten the burden. Moreover, Yi Su still needed to drink milk. Like many children in the tribe, Yi Su drank animal milk. He's probably the only child in the Yi family who grew up drinking animal milk. Yi Si sighed. While he was sighing, Yi Si saw Grey Horse and the other 5 return from the construction site. "Why are you back so early today?" Yi Si asked. Grey Horse and the others were very respectful to Yi Si. Leaving aside Yi Si's identity as a member of the Yi family, they and their young master's lives depended on Yi Si, so they couldn't be rude. Yanjiao's people seemed to have something urgent, so they stopped work early today. Grey Horse explained. "Something urgent?" Yi Si looked outside and lowered his eyelids. No one knew what he was thinking. After a while, he smiled and said, "It should be a good thing. Don't worry, you just need to do your job well." At this moment, inside the flaming river castle, Xiao Xian looked at the animal skin scroll in his hand and turned to look at Su Li, who was sitting beside him with a conflicted expression. Because of Wu He, Su Li, the leader of the Changel organization, had been a messenger across the sea. At that time, he had left with an attitude that said he would never deliver a second letter even if he was beaten to death. But now, the leader of the Changel clan sent another letter across the sea. However, unlike the last time, the letter this time came from the royal city. "Why are you looking at me? Read the letter. Hurry up and come back after you're done." Su Li was infuriated by Xiao Xian's stare. Ever since the matter with Wu he had been resolved, he had never intended to do such things again. Unexpectedly, reality had slapped him in the face. He owed Ji Fang a favor, so he had to be a messenger across the sea again. The letter was written by the current king of the royal city, Ji Fang, whom Xiao Xian had met at Gongjia Heng's place. As for Su Li's complaints, Xiao Xian, Gue He and the others ignored them. They were thinking about the contents of the letter. Ji Fang hoped that they could maintain a peaceful relationship with Yanjiao for the time being and not interfere with each other. Yanjiao was currently expanding and the royal city was in chaos. Rock Hill City was not as crazy as before, but the Yi family's incident in the royal city had disrupted the balance. Ji Fang was very busy. That was why Ji Fang hoped that Yanjiao would not do anything to the royal city for the time being. In order to prevent the flaming horns from causing trouble over there, Ji Fang would send someone to buy some of the slaves captured by and send them back. Ji Fang asked Xiao Xian to list out the names of the tribes in the flaming river basin when he replied to the letter. It would be easier to buy the slaves. As for the non-flaming river basin tribesmen, Ji Fang would not waste money buying them. As the largest slave trading organization, the high-quality slaves in the hands of Bai were not cheap. "I've already listed all the tribes that have lost people. I'll write them down when I reply, said Gigu, who had rushed over. But, Gigu had other ideas, but there were outsiders here, so he could not say more. The Yinjiao people in the room all looked at Su Li, who was sitting there impatiently. With so many pairs of eyes staring at him, Su Li couldn't ignore it even if he wanted to. What? You still want to discuss? Fine, I'll leave first. Let me know when you're done. Do you have a place to rest? I want to sleep. No matter where the Chonglis were, they would not mistreat him. Even if Su Li had to wait, he would wait in a comfortable place. He was not afraid that Yanjiao would do anything to him. Hurry up. Su Li turned back to urge them even as he was chased out. There were no outsiders left. Only Xiao Xian, Gigu, Zheng Luo and Ao were left in the room. Do you all believe what they say? Asked Zheng Luo. He didn't believe it. No matter what you said, Zheng Luo never had a good impression of the people there. Back then, the people from King City had tried to kill them. However, in the grand scheme of things, Ji Fang's words made sense. I don't know them well, so I can't say, said Ao. But the one who gave the order to kill Yanjiao back then was not the current king. Now that the new king has ascended the throne, he has no intention of becoming Yanjiao's enemy, at least for now. They said they would send back the people brought over. Gigu said. If we wait for them to buy the people from Bai and send them back, we don't know how long that would take. Ji Fang only said he would do it but did not say how long it would take. Most of the people taken away were children who had not yet awakened. Xiao Xian understood what Gigu meant. After all, Yanjiao was so far away from royal city. With no one watching over them, Ji Fang would not be pressured and his subordinates would take their time. When the time came, no one knew what would happen to the children and how many of them would be sent back alive. When the Flaming River Alliance was established, the Thunder Mountain Tribe and the Drumming Tribe said they hoped Yanjiao would bring them over one day and bring back the children they took away. After the alliance was established, Yanjiao brought them into the forest to increase the strength of each tribe. Now, the knives were sharpened. In the 6 months that Xiao Xian had disappeared, every time the Thunder Mountain Tribe came to Yanjiao, they would ask Gigu when they could go to the other continent to look for the missing people. Although only the Thunder Mountain Tribe came to inquire, they were representing their branch of tribes. They didn't necessarily want to search for the missing people immediately. Their tribes also wanted to search for the missing people, but they didn't have the strength to search for the missing people. If they went there rashly, it wouldn't be beneficial to their tribe. They were even prepared for the possibility that the missing people wouldn't be able to come back. They asked Yanjiao time and time again because they wanted to test Yanjiao and understand Yanjiao's future plans. Speaking of which, although these tribes had joined the alliance and acknowledged Yanjiao's position as the leader, they were still suspicious and did not fully trust Yanjiao. Speaking of missing people, it's not just the children who were taken away as slaves, said Ao. When Xiao Xian disappeared, there was an incident at the trading point. The Drumming Tribe led a few tribes to attack the trading point. That was why Ao had brought people into the forest to look for Xiao Xian but had returned. According to normal thinking, Yanjiao was not to be trifled with. Plus, they had established the Flaming River Alliance. Normal people would not take the risk to pull the tiger's whiskers. However, the Drumming Tribe was crazy. They would even sacrifice their lives to achieve their goals. They were a bunch of lunatics. A bunch of lunatics could not be judged by common sense. After Xiao Xian returned, he asked Ao about the Drumming Tribe. Ao only replied, "The Drumming Tribe is gone." The Drumming Tribe had not merged their fire seed yet. Ao had brought people to destroy the Drumming Tribe. The Drumming Tribe's fire seed had been destroyed by Guizhe. At that time, the Drumming Tribe's old rival, the Drumming Tribe, and a few other tribes in the Flaming River Valley who were skilled in martial arts had participated in the battle. However, after that incident, some people disappeared. They were not killed during the battle, they just disappeared. Even the shamans could not sense the auras of those people who disappeared. They could only sense that they were still alive, but they were very far away. There was once a travel team that said they saw some suspicious figures. Gigu guessed that they might be from the drumming organization. It was not just children who were kidnapped. Now, there might be adults who were kidnapped. This was why Gigu was cautious. Children needed time to grow up, but men in their prime could be used as coolies. This was only Gigu's guess. I think we should go pick them up ourselves. Gigu said in a low voice. Perfect, I want to see what the legendary royal city looks like. Zheng Luo and Ao did not say anything. They looked at Xiao Xian. According to the rules of many tribes, other than the shamans, the leader had the absolute right to speak unless the elders joined forces to object. However, in Yanjiao, Xiao Xian was an exception. His decision alone had great influence. He could even overturn Gigu's decision. After some thought, Xiao Xian looked up. All right. Since Xiao Xian agreed, Zheng Luo and Ao had no objections. The four of them discussed for a while. Xiao Xian wrote a reply on the animal skin scroll. As he wrote, Xiao Xian said, "This new king is very clear about Yanjiao's movements." Indeed. Looks like the royal city has been keeping an eye on Yanjiao. They can even guess what Yanjiao is thinking. Gigu was already on guard when he saw Ji Fang's letter. Although many things were not confidential, he had a feeling that Ji Fang had spies here. Zheng Luo also decided to call the patrol leaders of the trading point over and give them a few instructions to check if there were any suspicious people nearby. They also had to check the people in the trading point. In the future, they would have to check more carefully on teams that came from afar. After the discussion, Xiao Xian called someone to call Su Li over. He wrote a reply and handed it over. Bring this to Ji Fang. Tell him that we will personally pick up our people. I hope that by the time we arrive, we will already see that the people who were stolen are safe. Xiao Xian emphasized the second half of the sentence, especially the word stolen and safe. Su Li was still sleepy and angry at being interrupted, but when he heard Xiao Xian's words, he immediately perked up. There was a good show to watch. He had to go back and tell the other Chonglis to get ready to go to Royal City. After Su Li left, Gigu ordered, notify all the branch tribes that we have a mission. Ever since Xiao Xian divided the tribes that joined the Flaming River Alliance into different regions according to the branches of the Flaming River, it became more efficient to notify them. Every branch had a leader. As long as the news reached them, they would naturally use the fastest method to notify the other tribes in their respective branches. There was no need for the Yanjiao tribes to send people to notify them. Chapter 8-10. About 10 people had gathered in the courtyard outside the forging room. Gong Jiaren walked out of the forging room with a gleaming knife in his hand. The gleam was not the reflection of metal on other weapons, but a chilling, dangerous feeling that struck fear into the depths of one's heart. The blade had yet to be seen, but it felt like a snowy peak. Gong Jiaren was half naked, his body drenched in sweat. Due to the high temperature in the workshop, it was normal for people to be drenched in sweat. However, Gongjia Ren and the other Gongjia family members who walked out of the workshop felt a burning sensation in their hearts. It was as if they were experiencing a combination of fire and ice. Their faces were flushed from the excitement of this newly forged knife, yet they were drenched in cold sweat. It was a contradictory feeling. They could still remember the chilliness of forging in the forging room. Every time they breathed, the hot air that entered their lungs would suddenly cool down in the next moment. After leaving the forging room, every muscle on their bodies was still trembling. They were exhausted and trembling. Recalling the changes in the knife after each strike, and the way it was now, the Gongjia family members were filled with endless emotions. They ignored the exhaustion in their bodies. This was the best metal weapon they had ever forged. Before the knife was completed, they had already judged it based on their professional intuition. It was different from the rest. The new bronze weapon was made from refined copper ore and green-faced fanged beast blood. This knife was made from crystal core and the blood of the star butterfly larvae during their metamorphosis. Before this, the Gongjia family members had made many attempts. In the beginning, they followed the new bronze method to forge the knife. Due to the limited amount of insect blood, they had to conserve as much as possible during each experiment and adjustment of the ratio. Now, they had finally found the most suitable combination and ratio. The knife made from the star butterfly larvae's blood and the gold ore in the crystal core was much better than the one made from copper ore. Why were the Gongjia family members so excited? Because even the Gongjia family ancestor who discovered the star butterfly larvae's blood only used copper ore and insect blood to forge a weapon. However, the knife in their hands was made from insect blood and crystal core. A gust of wind blew past, and the blade seemed to emit a murderous hum, causing goosebumps to appear on the necks of the people in the courtyard. It was as if a cold wind with snowflakes had brushed past them, and they could not help but shrink their necks. Gongjia Ren took a deep breath and walked towards the Yanjiao family members in the courtyard, holding the knife with both hands. He handed the knife to Xiao Xian. "Let's test it." Gongjia Ren's eyes shone with anticipation. Xiao Xian looked at the knife in his hand. The Gongjia family members had made this knife based on his previous one. However, it was wider by a finger, almost the width of an adult warrior's palm. The blade was silvery white with no other patterns. It was very heavy, much heavier than Xiao Xian's previous one made from crystal core. It was not suitable for other tribes but for the Yanjiao people, it was a good weight and suitable for hunting. When he turned the blade, the sunlight reflected off the blade, causing the people who gathered around to squint their eyes. Usually, they would start with an intermediate stone but this time, Gongjia Ren tossed out a superior stone. A blinding flash of light followed by a crisp sound. Gongjia Ren's rock was split into two. The cut was smooth and there was no delay in the breaking of the rock. The blade did not bend at all. Everyone who saw this scene couldn't help but hold their breaths. Then, they were filled with intense joy. "Nice. Nice knife. Xiao Xian, can we use the same method you used in the desert?" asked Gigu. Xiao Xian had used his blood to ignite the knife in the desert. It was very effective against the puppets. However, Xiao Xian shook his head at Gigu's anticipation. "No. The new bronze gave off a violent vibe, while the new metal weapons made from crystal cores were all sharp. This saber, on the other hand, was similar to the new bronze in some ways, but it was on the other end of the spectrum, like a collision between a glacier and a blizzard. The knife was made from the blood of a star butterfly larva. That was why human blood could not exert its full power." Xiao Xian slid a finger across the blade. The coldness of the knife did not come from the blade itself. The temperature of the blade was only slightly lower than other metal weapons in the same environment, but there wasn't a huge difference in temperature. What truly made people feel cold was the coldness in their hearts and minds. "I heard you named the knife?" asked Xiao Xian. Gongjia Ren's excitement grew at Xiao Xian's question. "The knife's name is Frost Star." When the Gongjia family made a knife they were particularly satisfied with, they would name it. It was a way to express their feelings towards the weapon and to show off their work. Almost every craftsman hoped that their metal wares would become famous. Humans had a limited lifespan, but metal wares such as sabers and swords had a much longer lifespan than humans. In the future, when the person who made the metal wares passed away, the metal wares with a name would still be known and remembered by more people. At the same time, everyone would also remember the person who made the famous metal wares. This was also a continuation of the glory. Ever since Gongjia Ren and the rest arrived at the Yanjiao tribe, they had made many high-quality weapons. They had been here for a long time and had forged more crystal cores. They had come across more types of metal weapons and gained more experience. Their skills had improved tremendously and they had even found many ways to improve their skills. It was undeniable that the Gongjia family had talent in this area. They could always find suitable techniques and improve them faster than others. The cold star in Xiao Xian's hand could be considered the pinnacle of Gongjia Ren and the others' skills. Whether their skills would improve in the future or whether they would be able to create better metal weapons was still unknown. However, the cold star was the metal weapon they were most satisfied with and the one they wanted to make famous the most. There was no doubt about that. Ever since Gongjia Ren and the rest arrived at Yanjiao, Gigu, Ao and the other leaders had changed their weapons. Now, they were using new weapons made from crystal cores, a grade higher than new bronze. Now, what the warriors in the tribe were after was no longer a new bronze weapon, but a new metal weapon made of crystal core. However, after making so many weapons, Gongjia Ren and the rest did not have the desire to name any of them. Until this knife appeared. From stone tools, horns and bones, to gold, to new bronze, to new weapons made from crystal cores, and now Xiao Xian's frost star. This generation of Yanjiao people had experienced 5 qualitative evolutions in their hunting tools. Frost star. That's right. Gongjia Ren still remembered the white sparks that flew when they were forging. It was as if they were standing in the cold night sky and watching the stars fly by. Because time was limited, they had only successfully created one saber so far. In fact, they had also made a few knives in their experiments. Compared to normal weapons, these knives were naturally much better. However, to the Gongjia family's perfectionist OCD technicians, these were undoubtedly failures. They had to be melted down and not used in public. According to them, it's embarrassing and damaging to our reputation. Now that they had made Frost Star, Gongjia Ren and the rest had their own plans. They knew Xiao Xian was going to the royal city and there were many Gongjia craftsmen in the royal city. What would happen if their Frost Star met the craftsman's famous weapons? They had been forced to leave the Gongjia family. Perhaps in the Gongjia family's eyes, they were no longer important people worth mentioning. They were people who had been abandoned. They wondered how the Gongjia family members would react and they saw Frost Star. Gongjia Ren was filled with anticipation. If possible, they wanted to follow them to the royal city to witness it with their own eyes. Unfortunately, they could not go. They could not go to the royal city. If they went, they might never return. They were very satisfied with their lives in Yanjiao and were prepared to spend the rest of their lives here. Gongjia Ren sighed as he looked at the cloud patterns on the handle of Frost Star in Xiao Xian's hand. It was good that they did not go. When the Yanjiao people returned from the royal city, they would naturally tell them. They were confident in Frost Star but they were not the best craftsmen in the Gongjia family. When they thought of the Gongjia family full of talents, they were still a little nervous. At this moment, a sharp bird call came from the sky. It was Gigu's snow falcon. They're here. After Gigu's announcement, the tribes that had lost people in the past began to move. The snow falcon's call was to tell them that the tribes had arrived. Because the royal city was far away and it was inconvenient to travel by sea, there would be a limit to the number of people they could bring. It was impossible to bring all the tribesmen. In Guihe's notice, he said that the tribes would select their people to follow the Flaming Horn tribe when the time came. Tribes that worshipped martial arts and were physically stronger and more adaptable to new environments would have more people following them. As for tribes that were not physically fit for long journeys, although they would not send many people, they would provide some supplies for those who were about to travel. Everyone would help each other out. "How are things on the long boat?" asked Xiao Xian. Because they had decided to cross the sea, Xiao Xian had contacted the longboat tribe. Now that the longboat tribe's path to sea domination was getting better and better, the sea route had been established. If Yanjiao wanted to cross the sea, it would be most convenient for them to find the longboat tribe. After learning that Yanjiao was heading to the royal city, the longboat tribe also decided to go with them. They would be sailing with 3 new ships this time. The letter just arrived this morning. The longboat people want us to wait at the usual place, said Gigu. This was not the first time they had worked together, so one sentence was enough to know what they were planning. Chapter 8:11. The number of people Yanjiao brought this time was much more than the last time they met the Taiha tribe. After deciding to go to the royal city again, Gigu picked 1,000 people from the tribe to go with them this time. Ever since he became the chief, he rarely went on long trips. After all, he was busy in Yanjiao and Xiao Xian took care of other important matters. He didn't have a chance to do anything. Now, he could finally go on a long trip. Other than Gigu, Ao and Ta were going with Xiao Xian. As for Duo Kong and Zheng Luo, they stayed behind to guard Yanjiao. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong were from the other side of the continent. Even if they weren't familiar with the royal city, they had seen other cities. Ao and Ta were different. They grew up here and only knew about the other side of the sea from other people. They only had a vague idea of the place and had always wanted to go and see it for themselves. This time was perfect. There were 1,000 people from Yanjiao and another 1,000 from other tribes. Gigu sent out a notice to invite the tribes who had lost people to come over. He also emphasized that there would be great risks. However, many of the tribes who came over this time didn't have any cases of missing people. Some even volunteered to go with them. Xiao Xian even saw the more timid Ji tribesman. "You lost people too?" Xiao Xian asked. The chief of the drumming tribe, Abuli, nodded vigorously. "Yes, we've embarrassed ourselves." "What did he say? How many are missing? Are they children or adults?" Abuli thought for a moment, his eyes flashing. My lord, the adults lost." Xiao Xian looked at the other 4 Ji tribesmen beside Abuli. When they met Xiao Xian's gaze, the 4 Ji tribesmen hurriedly looked down at their toes. The toes on their big feet kept digging into the ground. They looked very nervous. They probably didn't know how to lie with their chief. Xiao Xian understood that Abuli was trying to find an excuse to follow him on this journey. He did not continue asking and left to check on the situation of the other tribes. Although each tribe didn't have a lot of people, like the Thunder Mountain tribe and the Drumming tribe, they only had 100 to 200 people. Even if they wanted to send more people, Gigu had already said that they couldn't send too many people. As for the other tribes, there were only a few of them. However, due to the large number of tribes that came, Xiao Xian's absence, other tribes had joined the Flaming River Valley. There were even tribes from the central region that had migrated over. In total, there were more than 1,000 of them. Hence, there were more than 2,000 people from the Flaming River Valley who had left this time. There would be even more people on the long boat. Although Yanjiao also built ships, there were only about 10 ships that could sail. This time, there were many people going. After meeting up with the Longboat tribe, they would borrow the Longboat tribe's ships. Ganqia decided to follow. After everyone was gathered, Yanjiao did not delay any longer and set off. The Longboat tribe's main camp had already moved to the seaside. However, they did not give up on the Longboat tribe's original camp. They had a backup plan. They only moved their main camp to the seaside. This time, Yanjiao's team would meet up with the Longboat tribe's original camp. Then, they would head to the seaside together. When Yanjiao's fleet arrived, the Longboat tribe's ships were already waiting there. Because there were not many people on the Longboat tribe inland, the ships were relatively empty. Yanjiao sent some people over. The Longboat's ships are faster. Xiao Xian could clearly feel the changes in these ships compared to the Longboat tribe's old ships. The Longboat tribe's talent in building ships was similar to the Gongjia family's talent in smithing. No one could be envious of them. Xiao Xian looked around. The people in the Longboat team must have brought the gems they got from the other tribes. Many tribes here didn't value gems. They only regarded them as beautiful stones and were not as attractive as animal meat and grains. Therefore, the longboat tribe could use cheap materials to trade with tribes who were willing to trade with them. Then they would transport the gems to another continent through the sea route and sell them at a high price to the people there. Then they would buy some useful things such as gold wares and other things back. The longboat tribe's impression of the slave masters was that they were stupid but rich. Since the sea route was established, the longboat tribe had made a lot of money. Back then, after the major tribes in the central region merged with their fire seeds, they all changed. Now, the richest tribe was the longboat tribe. The fleet followed the familiar inland waterway, passing through the grasslands until they reached the seaside. Because the longboat fleet came and went often, the tribesmen who lived along the waterway were shocked at first. Then, they ate and slept peacefully. However, this time, there were too many ships and people. It was obvious that this was a fleet made up of more than one tribe. That was why more people were looking at them. Faced with the curious gazes of the people along the shore, the people in the fleet who were traveling for the first time had mixed feelings. Of course, most of them were excited. Those who were chosen were not ordinary people. The longboat's new base was located on the coast. There were many mountains near the coast, so the longboat tribe did not build many houses here. Instead, they chose to dig caves. The last time Xiao Xian came, he could still see some houses and there were not many caves in the mountains. This time, there were fewer wooden houses and stone houses. However, there was a mountain that was almost hollowed out by them. There were many caves and passages in the mountain. Along the way, Xiao Xian heard from a few warriors on the long boat that they lived on the coast and preferred to live in caves because there were frequent storms. The wind was too strong. Even if the stone houses could withstand one storm, no one could be sure how many times they could withstand it. However, if they lived in caves, they did not have to worry so much. When the storm came, they would sail the ships back to the shelter behind the mountains and tie them up. Then, they would go into the caves and block the entrance. There were many ventilation holes in the mountains, so they did not have to worry about suffocation. Only the longboat people were familiar with the structure of the mountains. The terrain of the mountains was easy to defend and difficult to attack. The longboat tribe was very satisfied with this place. Otherwise, they would not have moved their base here so quickly. When the fleet arrived at the seaside port, Xiao Xian saw a few people on the long boat not far away. They were chatting and laughing with something in their hands. A fish about half an arm long jumped out of the water. One of the warriors on the long boat caught the fish firmly in his hand. With his other hand, he took out a dagger and cut open the fish's belly. He took out the organs and washed it with seawater. Then, he ate the fish that was still wagging its tail. From time to time, he would spit out a few scales and continue chatting. Looking at this series of actions, these people were already used to this kind of life. Ha ha ha, long time no see, Yanjiao people. The chief of the longboat tribe, Mu Fa, laughed as he came over. Because they were often exposed to the wind and the sun, the people of the longboat tribe were tanned and stronger than before. Even though they looked thin and weak, the people of the longboat tribe gave people a sense of explosive strength. Their eyes were sharp. It was not that they were against the Yanjiao people, but the many things they had experienced during the voyage had imperceptibly given them this kind of gaze. They exuded a fierce aura from head to toe. They were not inferior to the Yanjiao people who were used to hunting dire beasts. The longboat tribe today was completely different from the longboat people in Gigu's memory a few years ago. When the two were put together, no one would have thought that they were actually the same tribe. When the tiger in their heart was released, they became more dangerous. This was the true face of the ambitious longboat people. Mu Fa, who was in the prime of his life, had enough time to realize his ambitions. He had already become the leader that generations of longboat people looked forward to. He had left a thick mark in the history of the longboat tribe. When the descendants of the longboat tribe talked about the longboat era, they would definitely mention Mu Fa, the legendary leader. He had contributed greatly to the change of the long boat. Mu Fa came over to greet Gigu, then looked at Xiao Xian. Are we really going to the royal city? Although Mu Fa had never been to the royal city, he already had some understanding of it. If the Yanjiao people were to be surrounded by the slave master's army, they would be in danger. The slave master's words could not be easily trusted. What, have you changed your mind? Xiao Xian asked. Yes. Of course we're going. Mu Fa said without hesitation. When are we leaving? We can't go out to sea yet. Let's wait. Why? Are there more people coming? Xiao Xian had used a straw rope to divine that this period of time was very suitable for sailing. The longboat boats were also ready. Excluding these reasons, the most likely reason for Mu Fa's delay was that there were more people coming. Mu Fa did not deny it. A few days ago, people from the Hui tribe said they wanted to go with us. The Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe also sent me letters saying they wanted to go with us. Since the longboat's headquarters moved here, the Hui tribe, Tian Shan tribe on the grasslands, as well as the Mang tribe and the Eight Limbs tribe in the central region all had people following the longboat fleet out to sea. But why did they all come together this time? Chapter 8:12. The Yanjiao team waited for a few more days before the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and Eight Limbs tribe arrived one after another. They were all familiar faces from these three tribes. There weren't many of them, less than 500 in total. However, all in all, the team that was going to cross the sea this time was huge. The Flaming River Valley had around 2,000 people, the Longboat tribe had almost 2,000 people, and the Hui tribe, Mang tribe, and Eight Limbs tribe had 500 people. This number didn't sound like a lot, but it was already a huge number to the people on this side of the continent. After all, most tribes didn't have as many people as this number. This time, there were more than 100 ships of various sizes that were going out to sea. This included the Flaming Horn tribe's own ships and the 10 or so ships they bought from the Longboat tribesmen after arriving here. If all the Yanjiao ships were loaded with people, there wouldn't be much space to store goods. They had to prepare enough food and water, so they still needed to rely on the longboat. However, Xiao Xian didn't expect Mu Fa to make such a big move. He used almost 80% of the Longboat tribe's ships that could sail long distances. Xiao Xian didn't believe that the Longboat tribe didn't have other ideas. Thus, under Xiao Xian's questioning, Mu Fa finally told him what he was thinking. He wanted to use this opportunity to show off and make a name for himself. He wanted to let more people know that the Longboat people could sail, that their fleet was big, and that they had plenty of experience. Secondly, Mu Fa wanted to use this opportunity to find bigger business opportunities. Their previous business deals were only with small cities and merchant groups, but this time, he wanted to interact with larger merchant groups. He heard that there were many famous merchant groups in the royal city, such as the Black Bear merchant group that Xiao Xian knew. The Hui tribe was just curious and wanted to join in the fun. The Mang tribe wanted to observe the cultural development of the slave masters from a close distance and interact with them. The Eight Limbs tribe wanted to see if the royal city's silk products were better than theirs. They wanted to learn from them and improve their own silk weaving techniques. The different tribes didn't all have the same goal, but they all wanted to ride on Yanjiao's coattails. Even Mu Fa wasn't confident against the royal city, but with Yanjiao, he felt more confident. Especially with Xiao Xian, Mu Fa felt even more confident. The people they were waiting for had arrived, and the team finally set off. The route this time was different from the one Xiao Xian took to pick up the Taihe tribe. This was a route discovered by the Longboat tribe. After all, the destination was different. The last time they went to pick up the Taihe tribe, their destination was the forest, but the Longboat tribe usually went there for trade. Even if they couldn't get too close to the cities, they couldn't go too far either. After the Longboat tribe started their navigation mode, they had already opened up several routes. The route they were taking now was the most important one among the routes they had already decided on. It was also the route they sailed the most frequently. Life on the sea was undoubtedly boring. For many of the tribesmen who had no concept of sailing, this was a difficult experience, not to mention those who were seasick. Some of them were strong warriors who were good at fighting, but unfortunately, they were seasick. Fortunately, the people who came this time were carefully selected by each tribe. Even if they couldn't get used to it at first, they gradually got used to it after a while. Those who were good at swimming even had the courage to swim in the sea. The sea was different from the river. The Longboat tribe's warriors had already warned them about the things they needed to pay attention to in the sea. As long as they didn't look for trouble, there wouldn't be a big problem. Xiao Xian took Caesar with him this time. When they set off from the tribe, because there were limited boats and many people, Caesar had to follow the boat on land. Later, with the help of the Longboat tribe's boats, Caesar was able to get on the boat. During the voyage, Xiao Xian learned some things from Wuxia. However, the Longboat tribe hadn't been to the core area of the mainland, so most of the things they learned were from others. It was hard to tell whether it was true or false. With the improvement of the boats and adaptation to life on the sea, the Longboat tribe's sailing time was much shorter than Xiao Xian expected. When they saw the land, many people in the fleet felt as if they were alive again. "That's our longboat's important stronghold here," Wuxia said to Xiao Xian as he put away the monocular and pointed to the front. The monocular in Wuxia's hand was given to him by Xiao Xian. Wuxia also had people copy it, but the final product was far inferior to the one given by Xiao Xian. Therefore, Wuxia always carried this monocular with him. This thing provided a lot of convenience for their voyage. Xiao Xian looked at the land that appeared in the distance. On the fleet, Wuxia had already asked people to release smoke as a signal. The other side quickly responded by lighting up the smoke, indicating that everything was fine. The fleet didn't need to worry about anything else and could directly go ashore. For this stronghold, the Longboat tribe had spent a lot of effort. Because the two continents were getting closer, more and more people knew that there was another continent besides their own. Therefore, more and more people tried to cross the sea and go ashore. At first, everyone only knew that there was a place where the two continents were almost connected. It was undoubtedly the safest to go from there. They didn't need to worry about the weather changes at sea and the huge sea monsters that would come out from the sea to tease the ships from time to time. However, because of the war between Rock Hill City and the Royal City, people avoided that place. There was even a long stretch of coastline nearby that was guarded by the army. Other organizations that wanted to cross the river had to find another place. As time passed, more and more sea routes were discovered. The Longboat tribe was one of them. When they first arrived, they also had conflicts with the local organizations here, but they were resolved forcefully. Now, there were also some sailing groups here that knew of the longboat's existence. However, after several tests, they temporarily gave up on the idea of destroying the longboat. However, they still had to be cautious. This was also the reason why Wuxia asked people to release the signal after seeing the stronghold. As the land got closer and closer, the people on the ship could see the situation on the shore clearly. The Longboat tribe chose this stronghold. The environment was very similar to the new headquarters on the other side. When the Longboat tribe chose this place, they deliberately chose a place with similar terrain and environment to set up their base. Gradually, it developed into what it was today. After arriving, the team would rest here for 2 days before heading to the nearest city. Those who weren't used to the sea would rest on land. Those who were used to life on the ship would rest directly on the ship. Xiao Xian had already understood the surrounding terrain from Wuxia. After landing, he brought people to the forest to look for food. This wasn't a dense forest where fearsome beasts lived. Fearsome beasts were rare and there were only a few wild animals. However, at this time, they didn't need to care so much. Xiao Xian, do you think the royal city has received your reply? Do they already know that you're coming? Mu Fa asked. Thinking of the efficiency of the Chongli's people, Xiao Xian said with certainty, if nothing unexpected happens, the royal city should already know. As for whether the smaller cities know, that's hard to say. Chapter 8:13. Mu Fa sat on a rock in the grass to rest. Beside him were a few Longboat tribe members who had just returned from scouting. The rest of the Longboat tribe and Yanjiao's team were still behind. Mu Fa had led his men to scout ahead. After all, they were familiar with the area and could judge the slightest movement. Their main goal was to see if the slave masters and nobles had made any moves. According to the shortest route from the landing point to the royal city, the shortest route had to be near Chaoqiu City. The Longboat tribe went to Chaoqiu City the most. As one of the 6 main cities of the royal city, Chaoqiu City was the furthest from the royal city. Even if there was any news, it would be the last to receive it. If Chaoqiu City knew that Yanjiao had come from the other side of the sea, then the others would know as well. However, the scouts told Mu Fa that Chaoqiu City was no different from usual. This worried Mu Fa. If Chaoqiu City didn't receive any news, would Yanjiao's team start a fight with Chaoqiu City? Mu Fa frowned in thought. Suddenly, he looked up, his eyes flashing. When the others saw this, they all looked over vigilantly. There were many robbers. The Longboat tribe always encountered such things when they traded. The 30 or so Longboat tribe members stared in the direction of the commotion. They had already smelled the scent of hate. The black mackerels, one of the Longboat warriors said in a low voice. He looked like he'd smelled shit. Mu Fa maintained his sitting position on the rock, his eyes fixed in front of him. He didn't say much. The Black Mackerels were a relatively young organization. They'd only been established for a few short decades. They were a group of people who were good swimmers and had good sailing skills. They were adventurous and ruthless. In the past, the people of the Black Mackerels only traveled between some rivers and occasionally went for a swim in the sea. However, the risks in the sea were too high and there were no benefits to be gained. Thus, they had always focused on the rivers on the mainland. They engaged in river trade, transporting people, transporting goods, robbing and so on. Of course, if that was all, the Black Mackerels would only be an insignificant character among the many similar organizations. It was not until the cataclysm that the two continents approached each other that the Black Mackerels seized the opportunity to rise up and participate in the voyage. They would pay a high price to send some people to the other side of the sea. Over the past 2 years, they had recruited at least 2,000 newcomers. A portion of them stayed inland to continue the river trade, while the rest seized the excellent territories on the coast. The Black Mackerels had also wanted to buy a ship from the Longboat. In terms of building ships, the Longboat people did have the advantage. Each ship was large enough for multiple voyages, while the Black Mackerel's ships were much inferior. This was also the reason why they hadn't really set foot on the other continent yet. Their current ships could secretly transport a few people, but if they wanted to transport precious goods or engage in naval battles, then they wouldn't have much of an advantage. Unfortunately, the Longboat people didn't sell their ships. No matter how the Black Mackerels threatened or tempted them, they just wouldn't relent. When the Longboat tribe was fighting for territory, the Black Mackerels had joined forces with 2 other organizations to cause a lot of trouble for the Longboat. Therefore, when the Black Mackerels were mentioned, the Longboat people didn't have a pleasant expression. Soon, a team appeared in the vision of Mu Fa and the others. It was a team of about 200 people. They made a lot of noise and didn't try to hide their movements at all. This was also why Mu Fa and the others were able to detect them so quickly. Yo, I was still guessing who it was. So it's you guys. In the front of the team, the leader was wearing a gray leather coat. This was not the skin of a land animal, but the skin of a fish beast in the sea. More than half of it was shark skin, which was also the favorite skin of the black mackerels. There were also some dark red polished beads hanging around his neck. These were all ornaments polished from bones and stones that could only be found in the sea. This person's name was Sea Sand, and he was the current leader of the black mackerels. Mu-Fa looked at the team behind Sea Sand. There were 5 bow-horn giant bulls pulling wooden carts. The carts were filled with goods. Looking at the direction they came from, they must have gone to Chao City to make a deal. The movements of the 5 bow-horn giant bulls were too loud. They couldn't hide even if they wanted to. The bow-horn giant bulls were commonly used to pull carts in this area. They were bigger than the other bulls. The horns on their heads were like open bows. Their horns were bigger and longer than other bulls. They were easy to tame and were more docile than other bulls. They just looked scary. Looking at the goods on the 5 carts, the black mackerels had a good harvest this time. No wonder they were in a good mood. Seeing that Mu-Fa didn't respond, Sea Sand was surprised. If it was in the past, the people on the long boat would have given them a cold snort. But now, the people on the long boat didn't seem to want to talk to them. However, it didn't matter if they didn't say anything. Seeing that there weren't many people on the long boat, Sea Sand's rough face revealed a hint of cunning. He tilted his head slightly to look at the few people beside him. They exchanged glances. They could tell that the other party was also planning to teach the people on the long boat a lesson. Sea Sand's actions weren't subtle. He knew that the people on the long boat had seen it. He wanted to see their flustered and exasperated faces. But when Sea Sand looked over, he realized that the people on the long boat had strange expressions. They didn't seem worried. Instead, they seemed to be mocking them. A hint of surprise flashed across Sea Sand's eyes. The cunning smile on his face disappeared. The people on the long boat's reaction was very strange. To be able to become the leader of the black mackerels and lead the entire black mackerels to rise quickly, Sea Sand was quite perceptive. He made a hand gesture behind him, indicating that the people on the team shouldn't be impulsive. Why were the people on the long boat so calm in the face of their deliberate malice? Where did their confidence come from? Just as he was thinking about why, a few birds flew across the sky. Moo! 5 bow-horn bulls stomped their huge hooves and cried out anxiously. The people on the black mackerels team tensed up. Be alert. Someone's coming. The smile on Sea Sand's face disappeared. He was serious. He retracted his gaze from the sky and looked at the forest behind Mu-Fa and the others. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Sea Sand's ears twitched. He could even hear the footsteps of predatory beasts. The size of the beasts shouldn't be small. Who? Who is it? Crack, 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 a series of sounds of branches breaking rapidly approached. A gray wolf's paw stepped out of the forest. The wolf's back, which was much taller than a human, easily broke the surrounding trees. The wolf's mouth was biting a bleeding deer. The warm breath from the wolf's blood-stained teeth blew out. The surroundings seemed to be contaminated by the smell of blood. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. Sea Sand realized that there was a person riding on the wolf's back. After that, another 20 or so people walked out of the forest one after another. One of them was carrying a snake that was as thick as 2 people. The snake's head had already been cut off. The person carrying the snake coiled up the snake's body and tied it with rattan grass. He swung the snake around casually as if he was swinging an ordinary rope instead of a snake. The murderous aura that came from hunting increased even more after seeing Sea Sand and the others. It was different from the murderous aura of the people on the long boat. It was different. It was more like the murderous aura that came from deep in the mountains where the beasts gathered. To be able to create the black mackerels and develop it into a famous sailing organization in just 10 years, Sea Sand's eyesight was quite good. It was because of this that he was afraid and puzzled. Among the people who just appeared, there were at least 10 who could pose an absolute threat to him. This was just a casual glance. If he looked more carefully, he might find more powerful people who hid better. Who were these people? Where did they come from? What was their relationship with the people on the long boat? The more he thought about it, the stranger it felt. Si-san's pupils shrank and his eyelids twitched. Whether it was the wolf that appeared or these people, they all made him feel dangerous. What made him even more nervous was the sound of approaching footsteps in the distance. There were many people, thousands of them. Xiao Xian rode on Caesar's back. He glanced at Si-san and the others, then looked at Mu Fa who was sitting on a rock. He asked, "Trouble?" Si-san suddenly stared at Mu Fa. Mu Fa silently looked at Si-san, who was so nervous that his face was a little pale. After a few seconds, he smiled and said, "No." Si-san's face twitched. He forced a smile and said to Mu Fa, "Since you have something to do, I won't say much." Si-san quickly left with his people. He even changed their original route and took a long detour. Mu Fa watched them leave. Actually, it wasn't that he didn't want to use this opportunity to attack Si-san, but if they attacked the black mackerels this time, the black mackerels would definitely attack the long boat's stronghold while they were away. The black mackerels were very vengeful. According to Mu Fa's understanding of the black mackerels, if he let them go this time, Si-san would definitely not use this opportunity to cause trouble for the long boat's stronghold. Although he didn't like Si-san's way of doing things still had a bit of redeeming qualities. Mu Fa believed that Si-san, who left in a hurry, understood the meaning of his last look. At the same time, Mu Fa secretly let out a sigh of relief. Sure enough, coming with Yanjiao this time was the right decision. The long boat wasn't without help. They could still find help. At least for now, they had a mutually beneficial relationship with Yanjiao. On the other side, Si-san ran far away with his people. After confirming that no one was chasing them, he let out a heavy sigh of relief. He was unwilling to give up, but also thankful. Thankful that he didn't attack just now. "Boss, who are those people?" Someone beside Si-san asked. "How would I know?" Si-san said angrily, "They're definitely not from the long boat. I've never seen them before. Could it be that a tribe is migrating?" Someone guessed. In the past 2 years, there had been many tribes migrating far away from the city. It was no wonder that he was so suspicious. "No, they're not migrating." A figure floated down like a leaf and stood in front of Si-san. This was the person that Si-san had sent out to scout the situation. "What's going on?" Si-san asked. The person didn't keep him in suspense and said, "Migrating would definitely have old, weak, sick, and disabled people, but there's no such person in this group. No matter if it's a man or a woman, they're all very healthy and strong. Even those who look thin and weak give me a very dangerous feeling." When he thought of the young man with red patterns on his eyelids smiling at him, he only felt goosebumps all over his body. The feeling of danger flashed by, but fortunately, that person didn't attack him. "How many people are there over there?" Si-san asked again. "A lot. About 4 or 5,000. The 200 people, including Si-san, all gasped when they heard this. Then, where did those people come from? What's their purpose? Someone felt a sense of crisis and asked. Si-san narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of the sea. Could it be the tribesmen from the other side of the sea? How's that possible? Someone exclaimed. However, thinking of the long boat people's boats, this guess wasn't impossible. But I think those people are different from the rumors. The person who came back from scouting was puzzled. Rumors? Si-san sneered, rumors can't be trusted. When he first met the longboat tribe, it wasn't that Si-san didn't suspect the rumors he heard, but too many people said the same thing. Moreover, only people from this side of the sea went over, very few people from the other side came over. When they were transporting people, they didn't find anything near the coast that attracted them. Over time, C-Sand had the same opinion as the others. He thought that most of the people over there were barbarians who didn't have enough to eat, used animal bones and horns as tools, and had never seen metal before. The Longboat tribe's strength was just a special case. However, now he knew that those rumors were all fucking fake. Special case? There were so many special cases. Yes, there might be a lot of barbarians who didn't even have enough food, but they definitely didn't make up the majority of the population like the rumors said. Even if they did, they were a group of dangerous barbarians. Perhaps the reason why the people who crossed the sea from the other side of the sea didn't come back was not because they found a new paradise, but because they died. The people who came back from scouting were still thinking about the scene they saw. Those people seemed to be doing well, whether it was their clothes, the dazzling gems they wore, or the tools they used. After a moment of silence, C-Sand said, "Don't touch the Longboat's territory for now. Tell your people to keep a distance from them and watch from afar. Don't step into the Longboat's territory. Also, keep an eye on Chaoqiu City." You're tuning into the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.